Right, so the same Israel-funded lobby group that has apparently fed the BBC a line to attack Ken Loach over in a recent interview, are now also behind renewed recent attacks on Pink Floyd's Roger Waters. So it's very much a case of here we go again, the BBC and the campaign against anti-Semitism in lockstep with each other. However, it seems Waters might have taken a leaf out of Loach's book in handling them. Nonetheless, though, given the CAA's funding sources and their allegedly biased politicisation of racism, borne out by the fact that they're under investigation by the Charity Commission for that very thing, hence the word alleged, why is anyone taking any notice of them still? And why are their attacks still garnering so much attention in the mainstream media, like the BBC, supporting them again, just as they did with Ken Loach, just as they did with Jeremy Corbyn before that, who, if they were doing their jobs right, would be exposing this sham instead of simply platforming more of it, seemingly without question. Right, so the campaign against anti-Semitism have released a documentary claiming Pink Floyd co-founder Roger Waters is an anti-Semite, because, of course, it's what they do. And naturally, the BBC have, just as they've done with Ken Loach, which I've covered in another video, dutifully reported on this, given the story a massively elevated platform that it frankly doesn't deserve. And at this point, with both Roger Waters and Ken Loach in the frame for the same form of racism and accused by the same apparent charity, I have to wonder what the BBC itself is getting out of this. Or is the weaponisation of anti-Semitism slurs still such a rating winner that who cares if the source is decidedly dubious, and when the slightest bit of cursory investigation, even by a former welder like me with no particular journalistic training, can show it up to be an epic-sized can of balls in around 10 minutes, what does that say about them? Well, let's start with the BBC here. They reported that Floyd has been accused of anti-Semitism by people who worked alongside him as part of what they've called a damning documentary, an investigation by the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, who are claiming Waters made repeated derogatory references about Jewish people, including reference to the giant inflatable pig that floated above the crowd as part of Waters' The Wall rock opera, which would be daubed with highly offensive anti-Semitic slurs. Apparently, his former producer Bob Ezrin and a saxophonist called Norbert Stachel have also made claims against him. The BBC then proudly claimed that both they and the CAA have approached Waters for a response, but hadn't had one at time of recording. The one honest thing about the report was that Waters has denied that he is anti-Jewish and that actually he is opposed to bigotry and fascism. Now, this isn't the first attempt to accuse Waters, even this year, of being anti-Semitic, and I found it somewhat amusing that the inflatable pig has been brought up again, because that pig and the designs and logos and slogans it carries changes every year in order to make a relevant political point at the time. Now, the point the BBC are trying to get at here, but not being very honest in their reporting about, surrounded the inflatable pig, which was part of the show, as I've said, each year bedecked with different imagery in order to make a point. And in 2013, though, the pig sported the star David, hence accusations of anti-Semitism. That's where this story comes from. But this falls flat because the pig also had numerous other religious symbols on it. The point being made was that religion and the hatred it can stoke up formed part of that year's themes. They had any number of wars that you can look at throughout the years and centuries can be traced back to religious sources. So it's a perfectly relevant point to make, and no single religion was targeted. Therefore, it was not anti-Semitic. It was, in fact, a perfectly salient point then as it is now, in that particular instance, given the Israeli persecution of Palestine, given that it is an apartheid state. Another aspect of this documentary is that the CAA have teamed up with John Ware to produce it, made in exactly the same style, I felt, as that other infamous John Ware production, a certain Panorama episode you might have seen, widely discredited on the basis it allegedly allowed apparent whistleblowers to make unevidenced and unsubstantiated claims that it has been widely felt was little short of a hit job on Jeremy Corbyn. Again, asking the question there on whether he was anti-Semitic. So here we go again here with Roger Waters. It's Groundhog Day. Now, I've sat and watched this documentary, much as I had the Corbyn one, and I listened particularly to the testimonies given by Bob Ezrin and Norbert Stachel, and much of it I felt wasn't so much anti-Semitic accusation as much as trying to portray Waters in as negative light as possible in a variety of different ways. And Waters himself in his own response statement has said he has a tendency to be mouthy and irreverent. One thing I picked up on regarding Ezrin, though, is the list of other acts he has worked with, this massively famous music producer, which included the band Kiss as another example. And Kiss infamously have a certain member, a chap called Gene Simmons, who I'm sure many of you will have heard of, who has in the past made decidedly Islamophobic comments. So much so it ended up embarrassing Tory turned Labour MP Christian Wakeford, who posed with him earlier this year on a parliamentary visit, bragged, posting this photo of him stood with Gene Simmons and then apologetically removing it later on. Racism is racism, right? We challenge it all equally, right? Is that not what we're supposed to all do to tackle it? Is it not? Or can we expect some sort of a condemnation from the BBC or from the CAA on this towards Ezrin, or is it just purely Waters you're getting at here? Because that's not really then dealing with racism in any particular way, is it? That's weaponising it. Perhaps he did. Perhaps it just didn't make the CAA final cut. Let's be charitable. Let's just say, well, I can't prove it otherwise, and I can't say one way or the other, can I? I need to cover myself with this video. Let's just say, well, we didn't see it. The other thing Ezrin said was, as an American, he put some of what he accused Waters of, saying is down to a nascent type of anti-Semitism that you found in England as well as other places, which is a little bit broad. So would you care to elaborate and explain on that? Oh, whoops, that's where he got cut off, oddly enough. We moved on to someone from the CAA themselves, calling Waters a Jew-baiter, whilst also extolling the virtues of Zionism, of which, to a Palestinian or to somebody supporting their cause, there is none. And that is the crux of the argument. Frankly, you need to ask yourself, would this documentary have been made or even exist if Waters wasn't calling out Israeli atrocity as he does? What purpose does it serve to drag the man for things he may have allegedly said or done, based only on, I suppose you could call them, whistleblower reports, when you have to consider Waters' history and his role in actually opposing such things, as he's accused of, because actually there's very much solid empirical evidence for such things rather than just opinion, which is all the documentary here has. Waters' own father was killed fighting the Nazis at the Battle of Anzio in 1944. His rock opera The Wall is accused now of being anti-Semitic, but given it's been in production since 1979, why all of a sudden now? Taken 44 years to notice, or is it more likely just something else that can be weaponised in the service of an apartheid state? Waters dresses up as a Nazi and at some point out, well, it's a parody of them. He's literally taking the piss out of them. And if you don't get that, then you haven't seen the show. The entire production is analogous to Waters' own life, right down to the character he portrays. Pink, having lost his own father in the same battle, Waters lost his own. Put it to bed once and for all, Damo. Well, attempts were made earlier this year to have his show shut down in Berlin, and it went to court. Now, you'd think Germany, of all places, if the show was remotely Nazi-sympathetic in this day and age, it'd be shut down ASAP. But Waters won, of course, did he not? Because it was a parody, and it was clear for everyone to see who bothered to look at it, and therefore the show went on. But what are the accusers? As Roger Waters himself has said in his statement, people need to know about the CAA, the organisation that made this film. Following complaints to the Charity Commission, the CAA is facing scrutiny. Its core purpose is waging partisan political campaigns against critics of the State of Israel. Now, that investigation was launched in January of this year, and it is still ongoing, after being brought to the Charity Commission's attention by Jewish Voice for Labour for failing to meet its charitable objectives, namely the promotion of racial harmony through the elimination of anti-Semitism. Instead of doing that, they have been accused instead of persistent conflation and equating of anti-Semitism with criticism of the State of Israel. Whilst it has also been alleged by the JVL that the CAA are a partisan political campaigning group, which is completely against the Charity Commission's own rules, charities in the UK are forbidden from being political. So it will be interesting to see what comes out of their investigation at the end of the day, because if they find in the CAA's favour, I'll be very interested to see how they can possibly justify that, especially when amongst its funding streams it has been linked to the Jewish National Fund, which helps pay for Palestinian land grabs. From a left-wing perspective, the Waters film by John Ware is everything the Corbyn film was, but I'll let Waters himself have the last word on that. The film totally distorts and misrepresents my views about the Israeli state and its political ideology, Zionism. It relies on a definition of anti-Semitism that sees criticising Israel as inherently anti-Semitic and assumes that Zionism is an essential element in Jewish identity. These opinions, clearly shared by the presenter and the two interviewees, are widely contested by many, including many Jewish people. In summary, the film is a flimsy, unapologetic piece of propaganda that indiscriminately mixes things I'm alleged to have said or done at different times and in different contexts in an effort to portray me as an anti-Semite without any foundation in fact. I tend to agree with that. What's your view then? What do you think of Roger Waters? No smoke without fire, or is this another Corbyn-style hit job? Another Ken Loach-style hit job? The BBC is again aligning itself with a charity under investigation and aiding them in what seems to be something politically motivated when you consider Waters' criticisms of Israel and their funding. Another nail in the coffin for the Beeb's reputation, or no? Have your say on the story. Be part of the conversation in the comments below. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where whenever there's an accusation of anti-Semitism going around for political gain, there you'll find Keir Starmer or one of his ilk, won't you? And a few months ago, Starmer himself waded into Waters' accusations, doing so with all the grace of a ballerina hippopotamus. And I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so GB News has had a mare of a week, frankly, hasn't it? Completely self-inflicted, to the point that even Tories that appear on the channel's shows that are trying to help salvage their precious platform are in fact doing the complete opposite and seem to be ushering its end in all the sooner. The channel seems to be in its death throes, but it's not all bad for right-wing politics, of course. They'll still have the BBC. As things stand, though, 3 of the channel's hosts have been taken off air in the last week, so perhaps they'll need more Tories to take over as hosts and further bring into question whether the channel is the news outlet its name suggests, or is that only for when Ofcom aren't sniffing around? But with so many Tories on the payroll, that's a valid question, because at what point does the channel stop being news, if it ever starts, and becomes nothing more than a propaganda machine, if it was ever anything any different? Because it very much appears to be the latter. And when that's the case, Ofcom not shutting them down raises yet more questions, and the demise of the channel actually cannot come soon enough because people are not being well served by our media, which was already bad, but with the likes of GB News about is even worse now. The case for supporting alternative media in the UK has never been stronger. Right, so GB News, they've had a rotten week, and frankly they've deserved it. They've had it coming for a while, ever since they decided to be the one media outlet to not suspend Dan Wootton in light of the sexual abuse allegations that have been circulating about him, which I've covered in other videos. This past week, that all changed though, when he decided to have a giggle alongside actor turned hard-right half-wit Laurence FOx on his show at the expense of Politics Joe journalist Ava Santina Evans, who in a BBC interview stated that she felt a minister for men fed into a culture war. The Tories do love those, don't they? And it's hard to imagine this was dreamt up by the Tories for any other reason, though Evans later clarified she felt a minister for mental health, particularly in young males, had some merit, which I would absolutely agree with. It's very easy for we on the left to point and jeer at the sort of stereotype we have in our heads for the average GB News viewer, but 7,300 complaints about Fox's misogynistic rant off the back of Evans' BBC interview that set Wootton off in fits of mirth were received by Ofcom off the back of that. And really that gives me some hope for these people, because even they recognised that Fox's attack actually had nothing to do with what Ava Santina Evans had actually said. His attack was personal. He made it about her. He made it about her appearance. He made it about objectifying her and belittling her as a woman, to Wootton's obvious glee. Where Wootton later apologised for his conduct because, it clicked in his head to realise eventually how it looked, particularly, no doubt, after some feedback, and has said he should have intervened. No shit, Dan. Laurence FOx remained completely unrepentant, though, putting out on Twitter that he wouldn't want to shag a hyper-offended fourth-wave feminist, and that he would never apologise to the mob. He did apparently apologise to Evans, but that depends on what you read. Take a step back, everyone. It looks like his God complex has been shattered, and you really don't want to step on those pieces. FOx and Wootton are both now suspended from GB News, and that might yet become permanent. Wootton has also been officially sacked by the Mail Group, having been suspended already over those catfishing allegations I mentioned before, losing him £250,000 a year. Ouch! The third suspension this week from GB News, though, actually had nothing to do with this particular incident, but was too stupid to not keep his mouth shut over the same issue, and that was Calvin Robinson, who gobbed off on Twitter that he was not appearing, as he so often did, on Dan Wootton's show, in solidarity with Wootton being suspended, part of which read, "To have the conversations the shills on other channels cannot or will not have, we must do all we can to avoid GB News becoming just another MSM outlet, which it will if we let it. Our bosses are scared, afraid of Ofcom, afraid of the woke mob, and afraid they're going to run out of money unless they manage to sort this advertising problem out. We need to give them courage, not enable them to capitulate. If they pander to the woke mob, we are finished. Someone else might get the prime slot for a bit, but it will not be a promotion if you jump in Dan's grave. You'll just be making space alongside his corpse for your own. Standing up for Dan is standing up for the very idea of GB News. If he falls, we all fall. We are about to see if people really care about the project or they just want a better slot with a bigger team and better pay. He was then probably suspended too. Now, the likes of Calvin Robinson can bleat about GB News becoming part of the MSM, but actually what they've done is proven that they can't operate without becoming more and more extreme in order to stand out. And in doing so, the channel, well, the bosses have had to step in. The channel that rallies against wokery and champions free speech ends up parodying itself by doing just that, because they had no concept of responsibility to go with any of it. Where it comes to Wootton, given the seriousness of the allegations made against him earlier this year, the chance to rid themselves of him now feels like GB News regretted not sending him packing earlier. Rumours are he might well leave the UK after all of this now and go back to New Zealand, and if so, he won't be missed. The owner of GB News, Sir Paul Marshall, apparently wants to detoxify the GB News brand, but frankly, whilst it still disputes over whether or not it is actually a news channel or no, that's a little bit of a stretch. Also, if becoming mainstream is so anathema to them, why is Marshall currently trying to buy the Tory graph? Can that rag get any worse? Well, it might. Quite possibly if he succeeds. Just this week, Ofcom did happen to make a ruling in relation to GB News, though, and that was on its insistence that politicians acting as hosts did not break impartiality rules because the politicians were not presenting news programmes. Unfortunately, when the channel is literally called GB News, all programming is considered to be news to some extent or another by the people watching it. There's been a blurring of the lines here, and when you've got the likes of the Tory party deputy chairman, Lee Anderson, 30p Lee, interviewing Suella Braverman and letting her spout whatever she chooses completely unchallenged, that's propaganda. That's not an interview. That's not holding power to account. Just to reinforce that point, Anderson's Twitter account literally sports the GB News logo rather than that of the party he's been elected to represent. So what does that say of his priorities? Politicians are always in the news. All their actions, no matter how minor, are news to somebody. And to have one politician from the governing party interviewing a government minister in what's basically a puff piece for someone who, to my mind, is a wannabe fascist, well, how is that not news? You then have the likes of Esther McVeigh, though to the disabled and out of work, she's better known as Fester McVile, after her stint at the DWP, and her equally odious husband, the shameless Shipley, Philip Davies, presenting a show together. Then you have Jacob Rees-Mogg, who thinks himself far cleverer than he actually is, and whose own mouth ran into trouble on the first day of Tory party conference on this very issue, when speaking to Channel 4 News' Cathy Newman. Newman put to Mogg that the broadcasting code right now says no politician should be used as an interviewer in a news programme. 2 of your shows are being investigated by Ofcom. Do you think the code should be changed in the interest of freedom of speech? Mogg's answer to this was that I think the code works perfectly well. I think what I am doing is within the code. Really, GB News is the conservative equivalent of Channel 4 News. You're on the left, we're on the right. Okay, so you're being investigated over impartiality claims, and you basically confirm in your own words that GB News is a conservative outlet and therefore not impartial. Better make sure all the Tory electioneering that channel will be doing in the run-up to the general election goes down as campaign expenses, eh, Jacob? GB News is a channel whose reputation was already low, and it is just sinking lower. Tory conference has also seen Priti Patel, of all people, speak about GB News, calling them defenders of free speech, when they've literally suspended 3 of their top presenters over that free speech, coming without any semblance of responsibility. Not that she ever showed much responsibility when she was Home Secretary, of course. It is an irresponsible channel. Carol Vorderman this week took a swipe at Lee Anderson for his pathetic love-in with Braverman, to which Anderson answered that the sooner we ban single plastics the better, taking a personal swipe again, which just seems to be a GB News presenter's trait. It isn't just GB News that remains so dishonest, though. As I have said at the start, they still have the BBC, which, given it is reliant on government money via the TV licence to run, is always beholden to the government of the day. Their little collaboration with the campaign against anti-Semitism to attack the likes of Ken Loach and Roger Waters is a classic example right now. And those attacks really should be casting fresh light on all of the attacks on Jeremy Corbyn that came before, that came from the same vested interests of right-wing politics, or the establishment, and anyone, frankly, daring to criticise the state of Israel. What do you think, though? Is GB News just the most extreme end of the general travel of our media, or are they just more blatant about it? Have they had their chips now, or will they struggle on? Will they become more mainstream in temperament, but no less right-wing with it, in a bid to survive? And can they really, after they've been damaged so badly, with advertisers still pulling their revenue? Do let me know what you think of this situation in the comments below and be part of the conversation. I'm always interesting to read what you're thinking. Thanks for watching, though. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where much of the news coming out surrounding Dan Wootton had come from exclusives by Byline Times. Independent media again. He called the lawyers in apparently over that. Expensive ones too. It's all gone very quiet since, so I wonder what's happened. I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so conference season has begun once again, and we're starting in Manchester with the Tories in a show of just how badly they are crumbling as a party, with the vast majority of seats empty and Tory speakers literally echoing in their empty halls, such as the dearth of support for Rishi Sunak, our unelected, mandateless PM. The whole affair looks more like a wake than a conference, but it isn't just the Tory party membership who, like us, didn't get a say in electing the current Prime Minister that are, but members of his own party are too. Some literally drawing up their own manifestos right now before an election has even been called. And much of it is absolutely crackers. Sunak has only been holding on to his position and his power for so long by acquiescing to the whims of those with the loudest voices on his back benches, those seeking to strong-arm him into their favoured positions, and in his weakness and his desperation to remain in post, he's gone along with all of that. But ultimately it hasn't worked, because for a party that has always been united by its sense of mutual greed, the reason it has survived for so long, its continued drift towards the right-wing extremes has meant cracks in even that have started to show. Although it's much too early to consider this the end of the Conservative Party, as much as I'd love to live long enough to see that, they could implode completely yet, with a devastatingly bad general election result on the cards being the end result. Right, so Rishi Sunak is in a whole world of trouble, and having come into the role of Prime Minister mere weeks after last year's Tory party conference, it means he's had a near year-long stint as PM before facing his own conference and his own membership. And well, the hall speaks for itself, doesn't it? It's pretty darned empty in there. In fact, they've been encouraging people down to the front so that when the BBC pans across, it can dutifully give the impression of a much fuller hall, but it really isn't. I can't remember ever seeing keynote speeches with so few people in attendance, and you can't help but wonder how much of that is down to the fact they didn't get to pick the person now running the party, or more to the point, ruining it. I say ruin it, it's the Tories. It's pretty much a ruin anyway, isn't it? A place where hope goes to die, where aspiration is killed off, and where those with more money than you support pledges, positions and promises to make your life harder as a means to win power. All aided and abetted by our mass media, of course. It's just as bad when people are polled too, though. According to Opinion, poll that's just come out, fully 34% of Tory voters are taking their votes elsewhere now. That's over a third of them. And in worse news, that figure rises to 39 to 40% in the Midlands and the south of England. The Tory shires, the Blue Wall, the Heartlands. And for those of us who kept an eye on local election results earlier this year and noted the big gains being made in those areas by the likes of the Lib Dems and the Green Party, it's little surprise to see where many of those Tory votes are going. And as much as it's true that locals are not a good analogy for where votes go in a general election, they don't look to be returning to the Tories wherever the votes end up. In worse news for Rishi Sunak, though, it's abundantly clear that his own MPs have very different ideas about what is required to win the next general election, with at least two different factions demanding he does things their way. For those with a passing familiarity with Tory factions, the best known is probably the ERG, the European Research Group, the batshit hard-right Eurosceptics who just have the feeling they'll have launched something, but actually no, it's not them. They haven't. They might do still, but it's not them at the moment, although some of their number have joined with other factions in order to push a rival manifesto forward. The less well-known New Conservatives, a contradiction in terms given the party viewpoint remains stuck in the Victorian era, has welcomed some ERG support, amongst others, for their alternative vision, led as they are by Great British Bake Off bun merchant Prue Leith's son, Danny Kruger. Well, they're launching their manifesto today, signed up to by Jacob Rees-Mogg, Preeti Patel, Ian Duncan Smith, Miriam Cates, John Redwood, and more, to 5 policy pledges that they believe will win them the next election, which are to scrap the European Convention on Human Rights and draw up their own Bill of Rights. Yes, that old chestnut again. To cut taxes, which obviously you knew it was going to come somewhere, which have to be paid for, but you can't convince this lot Liz Truss was ever wrong. Halve the number of immigration visas given out to migrant workers, foreign students and their families, cutting our noses off to spite our faces when there's a massive work shortage in key sectors and industries that we've always been reliant on for foreign work. To stop A-level students who fail from going on to university by blocking access to student loans to them and making them do apprenticeships instead. So we're back to grammar school style school of thought and 2-tier education. And they also want to ban gender ideology in schools too, because free speech and freedom of expression is banned, presumably unless it's their right to say and do whatever they like. Absolutely mad, completely backwards looking, will appeal to frothy-mouthed, gammon-complexioned types, but even they are thin on the ground. Look at the sparsity of those seats. The other manifesto, also looking to drop today, is coming from the Northern Research Group of Tory MPs, the Red Wall seat types, which is chaired by Jake Berry, who also interestingly signed the New Conservatives manifesto, so perhaps he needs help making up his mind. But given this is all about splits and dividing opinion, wrecking the Tory party, he's hardly going to be alone in that. This lot are all about a better deal for Northern seats, though, and they count the likes of Esther McVeigh and David Mundell amongst their members. And they are apparently bringing forward 8 demands of Rishi Sunak. Not all published at time of writing, though, and some of these almost sound sensible, which is slightly scary for a rotten lefty like me to admit. But they want 500,000 new houses built, clearly needed, all over the country, so no argument there, except they should, of course, be social housing, but that won't for one moment be what they are calling for. They want an east-west rail line linking Liverpool to Hull. Good idea as well, I think. Devolution of taxation to the north, though, which, of course, they'll want less of anyway. So why do you want that as long as it goes down, right? You just want tax cuts. That is Tory ideology, yes? Unless you're going to be honest about the need for higher taxes, perhaps. And that taxation controls inflation. But if you get given the keys to taxation in the north, who ends up paying more tax to offset the next time you lot in power screw up the economy? You're going to disproportionately have to overtax the south? Well, that hit your own blue wall. That'll go down well, won't it? Of course, if you listen to Rishi Sunak himself, you'd be forgiven for thinking inflation is a tax, is what he literally said to Laura Koonsberg, sadly, back in her post this morning on her BBC show. And even she couldn't let that one slide when taxation is literally a brake on inflation. I suppose for the easily led members of society, it's quite the wheeze if you can rebrand something that isn't a tax as a tax, and then when you cut it, you can say you cut taxes, even when you literally haven't. It's all about as honest as Sunak's 7 bin speech, though, so it's more of what we can come to expect from him. Bigger and bigger lies, apparently. No wonder he's in so much trouble. Inflation is the rate at which costs rise and fall, not in and of itself a direct cost. The man lies like a rug, and I like to save that phrase for Keir Starmer, so I'm somewhat irked I've had to roll it out here. I'll wear it out before long. Any other idioms for liar you can think of, do let me know. I'll cheerfully steal them. Above all else, though, what is uniting all these disparate factions, it would seem, though, is that desire for tax cuts. And Jeremy Hunt is feeling the pain of having to see some way through for those, to allow some, somewhere, even though he can't afford them. So he's apparently planning yet another raid on social security to pay for them. Austerity is back, folks. Kick the poorest, kick the ones on benefits, even if they're in work, to give the richest more. 100,000 more people are moving into state support and leaving work, which apparently proves the system isn't working. Not that, the way the country's being run is making people more and more ill. It's cuts literally driving that. You cut wages and people have to tighten their belts. We've seen rent rises, leaving people with less money and more costs, so they're spending less, knocking on to the rest of the economy. We've seen the high street shops that have been collapsing, chains collapsing. It's part of the knock-on effect. Because if people have less to spend, they stop spending, and the economy takes a hit because money isn't moving around and working to grow the economy. That's how the economy grows. With a slowing economy, as the Tories have presided over, with having to print more money to pay for stuff despite the tax take having fallen, the national debt has risen, and the Tories' answer to that was to cut a bit more. And so people have less money again, and more shops and services close. The national debt keeps rising, and so does the benefit bill then, as more people find their work no longer pays enough to live on. The Tories' answer is to keep on cutting, though, and on it goes until the national debt ended up doubling and economic growth completely slumped, and it's where we are today. It's almost as if investment in people is financially sensible and will grow the economy, and taxing the right people properly is the answer to getting the national debt back down to where it should be. But no! Still, they want to cut taxes, which means cuts to spending, and all the damage my explanation here shows. It's no wonder the halls are empty when people are sick and tired of the same things being said as the answer to the same problems that never, ever, ever end up getting fixed. The Tory party are at each other's throats as warring factions, but at the end of the day, they all still basically stand for the same thing. They cannot countenance another ideology deviating away from that. It's now all about who is in charge, who has got the power. And despite all of them being fed up with Sunak, as rival manifestos show, utterly undermining him to nobody's surprise at all, equally none of them can come up with a replacement either, as talentless as they all are. Everyone they pick has been failing. It'd be hilarious and so enjoyable if it wasn't for the fact Keir Starmer is waiting in the wings to take over, who will do exactly the same thing they are doing. How bad do you think things are for the Tories based on what you might have seen or heard so far, though? Are they facing extinction at last, or will there be some kind of saviour from somewhere? Are you just enjoying how embarrassing this all is for Sunak and co? Do let me know in the comments below. Have your say on this and be part of the conversation. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content up daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where that 7-bin speech of Rishi Sunak really did show the lengths he'll go to take you all for fools. And I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so censorship and the battle against online misinformation is something we've seen a lot of in the news. Particularly that coming from alternative media, chiefly because they're the ones often being targeted by such things when they're used in a dishonest way, along with the platforms that host them. But one of the most prevalent online media censorship groups globally, and notably its CEO, actually have direct links to MPs in this country and even to shadow ministers within Keir Starmer's Labour as well as the Conservative Party, and not least of which accusations of taking cash in return for pushing censorship. So what does that say about it? What danger does that present to those of us trying to get the truth out that our mainstream media need not worry about their own platforms, but those smaller outlets absolutely do? Alternative media has sprung into being and been thrust into relevance because it challenges the old establishment-friendly media outlets owned by the Rupert Murdochs of this world. It offers insight into stories that don't often get told, and it is particularly telling that it is one such alternative outlet that has broken this story, because we need to fight this or face a world where we're dumbed down again, with only selected voices being chosen to report on what they consider passes for news. Right, so let's begin with this online censorship group then. You may have heard of them, you may not have, but they're called the Centre for Countering Digital Hate, the CCDH. And they came into being coming up on 5 years ago here in the UK as a campaign group to counter exactly what it says on the tin, digital hate, or what passes for it in their view. They campaign on social media platforms chiefly, or for social media platforms to change their wicked ways, so to speak, but other big tech firms too, to stop providing services to those who are using their platforms in order to promote hate or disinformation. And from that perspective alone, it seems like a perfectly fine, reasonable goal, doesn't it? We know neo-Nazis use these platforms and anti-vaxxers and the like on social media to promote their ideas, and campaigning for the likes of Facebook and Twitter to not continue to permit such things on their platform is entirely reasonable. Free speech is one thing, but it has to be used responsibly, does it not? And these things are harmful and hurtful and false, and we don't want to live in a world where such things are promoted, do we? Or if you're watching this and you do, boy, you're going to hate this channel. Turn away now. The trouble is, though, such entities are also inherently political, and when politics comes into it, such an organisation may end up being weaponised against those trying to tell a few home truths, getting turned on. And when you consider the track record of the CCDH's CEO, this is something that becomes actually very relevant indeed. The CCDH was started up by a chap called Imran Ahmed. Now, Ahmed was at the centre of an infamous Labour Party story from a little while ago concerning right-wing Wallasey Labour MP Angela Eagle and the story of a brick that was allegedly thrown through her window in a homophobic hate attack that just happened to coincide with her constituency Labour Party moving to deselect her as their MP and choose somebody else. Brickgate. Do you remember Brickgate being in the news? Well, Ahmed at the time was Angela Eagle's communications director. To cut a long and frankly ridiculous disinformation story short, there was no brick. The window broken was in a public stairwell in the same building as Eagle's office, not an office window of hers itself. The whole affair was designed to paint her local Corbyn-supporting party as homophobic, despite, incidentally, the CLP chair's daughter getting married to a woman the day after these allegations got made. But of course it all culminated in Eagle's CLP getting suspended, shut down in effect, thus saving her from deselection, and of course she remains their MP to this day. More detail on this incident, however, came up in the now infamous Labour Leaks report, when the head of disputes, then later whistleblower on John Ware's Panorama hit job on Corbyn, remember that Panorama, I was talking about it in a video the other day, the chap in question, Sam Matthews, said of the suspension as written in the Leaks report itself, "I have every sympathy for the fact that Angela is still in a difficult situation as they are properly organised in her constituency. My worry is that based on track record, no matter how much time we give Angela, in practice Imran, to organise, so little work will go into it that we'll end up getting asked to extend it further and further. At the moment, Imran, an Eagle staffer at the time, wants the suspension to remain in place until at least November, but I would be really worried about turning up to disputes in October and having to report that Wallasey was still suspended because they haven't held an annual general meeting yet." The Imran being referred to there was Imran Ahmed, driving to extend the results of a smear, of disinformation himself, over an incident in Wallasey that never happened, looking to extend that further so he can subvert local party democracy and save Angela Eagle's bacon. With the assistance of Labour HQ, as it was, the same people who worked so hard to bring down Jeremy Corbyn, no less. So is he the sort of person you would trust to head up an organisation that seeks to challenge disinformation online? Well, I certainly know how I feel about that. He certainly seems to know a thing or two about sowing disinformation based on all of this, doesn't he? But it wasn't his only alleged foray into misleading people. Some of you who might have also heard about another infamous organisation called Stop Funding Fake News. Now, this was supposedly a grassroots-led organisation that went after alternative news outlets, seeking to convince their advertisers to pull their funding from certain outlets in order to bring them down. One of the more well-known targets of this was the Canary, their advertisers being heavily targeted, despite them being a left-wing outlet, a small outlet seeking to get the word out that mainstream news won't cover, and of course the likes of Rachel Riley became involved in supporting Stop Funding Fake News. You can guess the type of thing she was accusing people of. Well, it turns out they weren't grassroots-led at all, as eventually Imran Ahmed was forced to admit he'd been behind that one as well. Well, Ahmed's latest adventure, the CCDH, has been far more successful for him, but in light of what you've read here, would you trust it? By 2021, the CCDH had set up shop in Washington, D.C. and was involving itself in US politics. Chiefly, it had been disseminating Republican Party claims and Trump speak, but in March of 2021, they hit the US political landscape running with a report about online misinformation happening over there. And this is where a US alt media outlet picked all of this up. A media platform called The Tablet, which ironically, given the Rachel Riley mention a moment ago, is a US Jewish magazine. At this point, the CCDH were running stories regarding misinformation surrounding COVID. It drew the attention of the then CEOs at Twitter, since the report named several Twitter accounts and led Twitter to take action against those accounts, which happened to include people such as Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the nephew of JFK. Later on, the Biden administration quoted the report to attack Facebook, claiming 12 accounts were responsible for 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation there, and accused the platform of undermining federal government policy on this. Facebook in turn attacked the report for being free of evidence, not explaining how they had come by their numbers and their conclusions. Twitter, of course, has come under new management these days, now known as X, and run by Elon Musk, who has been repeatedly blamed for platforming hate speech, is now suing the CCDH over its claims against him, which will make for interesting reading, since the CCDH would very much now need to pony up the evidence they say they have, that Facebook have already said they do not. What CCDH does have, though, is after its first year operating in the US, it had made $1.5 million, of which $1.1 million came from a single anonymous donor. So who is it taking cash from with cash like that to spare? And what are they paying for? All these social media outlets are poor at clamping down on hate speech, on false narratives, on abusive and harmful claims. We can all criticise them, and justifiably so. But we've also seen how the CCDH has helped shape government policy in the US by attacking critics of the current administration, as well as attack the platforms we alt-media outlets rely on to do what we do. US COVID policy was shaped by disseminating and discrediting critics of the Biden administration. Equally, the guy behind it, Ahmed, was doing likewise here in the UK as a Labour MP's employee. Others who have been involved in the CCDH include Tory MP Damien Collins, as well as Morgan McSweeney, Keir Starmer's former Chief of Staff. Others include Kirsty McNeil, who worked for Gordon Brown when he was Prime Minister, and is now a Scottish Labour parliamentary candidate. How can an organisation that purports to challenge false narratives possibly do so when it is blatantly, obviously, too close to the biggest liars of them all of our ruddy politicians? You can imagine what an authoritarian like Keir Starmer would like to do to gag those of us who call out his lies, his misinformation and his diktat. But once in power, will he actively embark on a systematic shutting down of dissent when he has party loyalists like Ahmed working behind the scenes of opaquely funded organisations that have already been observed taking down those who challenge governmental policy and government interests? It's a bit of a scary thought, isn't it? What do you make of this story, though? Are you surprised that former Labour staffers are lurking in the shadows and are behind some of these sort of organisations? Or is it totally expected? Should we as independent media and you as our audiences be duly concerned about this? Do they actually have a point? But at which point do you police the platforms that we all use, in which case? Do let me know your thoughts on this story in the comments below. Do support your favourite independent media as well if you can afford to without hardship, be that me or somebody else. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Keir Starmer the liar trended last week. So how much of that would he get away with if he has an organisation calling people out who are calling out his lies? Should he ever reach power? Well, that's a bit of a headache to try and think about, isn't it? The groundwork is there. Perhaps Elon Musk will do us all a favour in court and take them to the cleaners, but we can't rely on that. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so the overarching theme this week of Tory Party Conference, if you've been tuning in, I'm sure you have, I can't imagine why you wouldn't be, is that those members who have bothered to turn up to it, given all the empty seats that we've seen, that they prefer to actually listen to the crazier arguments being made in the fringe events rather than listening to actual ministers speak about the stuff that's important to government, the things that they want to bring into law in the main hall. And with Sunak due to speak on the final day, well, it makes you wonder whether members will bother to stay for that or just sod off home early before the train strikes hit, which have been scheduled for that last day of Tory Party Conference. And you have to ask, why would they bother when Sunak, already regarded as a complete and utter weakling of a Prime Minister, has been reminding people just how weak he is all this week long, even at this first Tory conference of his. Right, so Tory Party Conference rumbles on, and there's been a bit of a theme emerging in that the government ministers are proving to be less of a hit than they might like. I can't imagine why. But actually it's the fringe events, the backbenchers and those speaking outside the main arena that are, for the most part, garnering more attention. And none of it, absolutely none of it, is doing Rishi Sunak any favours at all. Least of all Sunak himself, in fact. You know they haven't got a Scooby when they travel all the way to Manchester, hold their conference in Manchester, and then decide to announce that HS2 won't now be going to Manchester. Most delegates arrived on a day of rail strike action. Many of the empty seats we're seeing for those first speeches were down to delegates not actually able to arrive because of the strikes. And frankly, the Tories holding their conference in the north, when their base is in the south, has always been a little bit of a weird one to my mind. Is it just rubbing it in the faces of those who don't vote for them? I have no idea. Do they get off on it? But of all the places to hold their biggest annual fundraiser, they do it in a city that they're now denying something massive to that they've been promising to them for years now. Well done, Tories. Well done. It also hasn't helped when ministers who typically like to unveil a few surprises to please their membership and their donors decide to rake up old news instead, such as Jeremy Hunt has done, once more recommitting to paying for tax cuts by slashing welfare, because they seem to announce this every single year. Blatantly appealing to those who like this idea, it is a vote winner because it is popular amongst those with money to batter those with next to none. It wasn't even his biggest sham declaration, though, because he also declared a ban on debanking MPs in the wake of the Nigel Farage-Coutts crisis, which was abject nonsense from start to finish. He's going to change the rules so nobody can be debanked for being politically correct even though the Financial Conduct Authority has already investigated this and found no evidence that it is happening or has ever happened, including in connection with Nigel Farage. But of course the Tories have let Farage in, so is it any wonder Tory ministers are now trotting out lines to appeal to the UKIP types or worse? In fact, this entire event is sounding more UKIP-y than the last year, and the year before that. They're only ever moving further and further to the right. This was right up there with Sunak himself trying to pretend inflation was a tax, though, wasn't it? It's that incredibly ridiculous level of dishonesty that they've peaked at. On top of that, discussions have happened in the main hall by main speakers talking about dumping human rights, Brexit still, attacking trans rights, and the point just keeps getting reinforced. They are just becoming more right-wing and extreme. And that's the main hall. And that's all happening in Sunak's name. That's stuff he's signed off on. That's stuff he's endorsed. But the thing with Tories is no matter how much you give them, they want more. They keep taking more. So even though those discussions, as mad as they are, have been happening in the main hall, the more popular events have been happening outside of it, and they're even more crackers. Liz Truss's speech outside the main arena ended up standing room only. Farage was there. Preeti Patel was there, all hosted by the business editor of GB News, no less. So little surprise she started by bigging them up, despite them having just suspended 3 of their highest profile presenters in the last week. No doubt if she fancies returning to the Tory leadership job, she's getting her media support in early. And she rattled off even more extreme measures, her utter refusal to accept that her tax cuts last year were wrong by demanding more of them. She wants to see a return to fracking. It was just madness. But it appeals to the faithful, and they elected her over Sunak, and now Sunak is what they've got anyway, none of whom chose him. It wasn't just Liz Truss undermining Sunak and exposing his weakness, though. I spoke in a video yesterday about the new Conservatives faction having launched their own manifesto to try and get Sunak to implement not in control of the party really as he is. Otherwise, you wouldn't get groups of his own MPs feeling so emboldened as to write up their own legislation and try to force their leader to adopt it. The chair of this faction, Danny Kruger, was at a fringe event himself where he said, "The penny is dropping amongst people in Westminster that the government doesn't run the government. There's a huge movement going on globally to create essentially a world government that will have power to dictate to national governments what they should do in anticipation of another pandemic." And he went on by saying, "There is no greater threat to our national democracy." Absolutely bonkers position to take, implies Sunak isn't really in charge and that other governments are pulling the strings and that we have to do what other people say in regards to pandemics and stuff like that. Well, we did so well with the pandemic, didn't we? I can't imagine why other people think we need to be told what to do next time. Why does this man still have the whip? Why does Liz Truss, after her arrival, was a walking, talking, batshit undermining of Sunak as well, with the attendants just reinforcing that? Making Kruger's daft comments even dafter was that the event he spoke at was a joint one run between the Institute of Economic Affairs and the Taxpayers Alliance. Who runs them? Who funds you? Oh, dark and shady think tank types. Who's pulling Kruger's string in this case? The icing on the cake, though, was the speech that was given by Boris Johnson's superfan, Lord Cruddas. As I said earlier, Tory conference is all about the funding. It's all about wooing the donors, bringing in the money, and Cruddas himself was one of those. But he stood up and said to his fellow wealthy Tory money spaffers, accusing Sunak of destroying the party, and said, "I'm asking all Conservative Party donors, big and small, to stop funding the Conservative Party until we can implement constitutional change." So you're launching a coup to defund the party until it does things your way, then? Don't they always tell us that the trade union barons are always dictating to the Labour Party and that Labour has to jump when they say, has to say how high whenever they say jump? What exactly is this game here, then? The Cruddas way, frankly, is to bring back Boris as fast as possible, an unelected peer in the House of Lords. But he holds the Tory whip there, and still, Sunak couldn't take any action against him either. Or wouldn't take any. Weak. He's weaker than my mother's tea, which is little more than frightened milk. Sunak is in an absolute boatload of bother and just appears to be waving and grinning his way inanely through it all as if it isn't happening. And this morning it just continued as Susanna Reid rinsed him on GMB, putting to him the example of an 80-year-old pensioner living in a mobile home who has had to shell out on vet bills, his pet insurance doubled as a result, which combined with the cost of living crisis and the rising cost of food, the guy has had to consider using a food bank. Reid put to Sunak, should he go to the food bank or get rid of his dog? Well, not happy with being presented with such an example, Sunak decided to try and make up his own example about a single mum in work and answer that instead, though Reid didn't let him, wouldn't have a bar of it, and the entire interview descended into yet another self-inflicted car crash on Rishi Sunak's part. This conference has become a mess, and it's entirely of Sunak's own making. No matter how many times he tries to pretend that many of the current problems didn't happen on his watch, like the Tories have now gone from blaming the last Labour government to blaming the Tory government prior to 2015, when Sunak himself entered Parliament. He has been limper than a vicar's handshake ever since he became PM, refusing to mete out discipline, despite all the scandals he's had to deal with and been involved in. So now he's at the point where he'd be a hypocrite if he started to do that. And of course that means there is no discipline, there is no direction, and he will be constantly undermined by members of his own party, no matter how mad they might be. They will continue to become more dysfunctional and end up in more disarray because of it. That, frankly, should be a cause for celebration, but unfortunately it comes with a warning label, given the opportunity that gives to an equally odious individual like Keir Starmer. I personally can't see Sunak lasting a lot longer. It's not so much an election campaign the Tories might be about to embark on, but with Sunak's one-year grace period almost up, just a week or so's time, it might be a leadership election in the offing instead. What do you reckon though? Leadership challenge or election? Might Sunak call one early just to flip his naysayers the bird, or is he too chicken even for that? Will things continue to linger and crumble even more? How do you see things playing out? Do let me know in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Liz Truss spelt out what might be the beginnings of another mad manifesto of her own last month. Would a leadership challenge see her return? Would she go for it? What a horrible thought that is. And I'll hopefully see you on the next video. Cheers, folks. Right, so as Tory conference draws to a close today, Sunak currently delivering his keynote speech as I'm recording this. I wonder if anybody's bothered to stay for it. The biggest takeaway from it all, though, is that this is a government that is so addicted to lying you'd think Boris Johnson had never left now, still being run in his dishonest way. Except it's not just him doing the lying with impunity, with every drawn breath. It's literally been every minister, pretty much, that has got up to speak in that main hall. And just like Johnson, in order to keep the lies going, more lies have to be told to back them up. The lies get bigger and bolder and more unbelievable until we finally reach the spectacles that we've witnessed at this conference, where you have to wonder how they can possibly top the lies they're now telling, where even the BBC is calling out the dishonesty, where they're literally being heckled by their own members to the point they're throwing them out. Rishi Sunak is running an operation now built on conspiracy theories and lies, so how he thinks he can turn that into a winning strategy, I cannot fathom. And with his own ministers buying into that strategy, it's almost like they want to lose the next general election. Right, so, mad, unbelievable Tory lies. We thought they'd peaked the other week when Sunak gave that ridiculous speech about meat taxes and 7 bins for your rubbish and recycling. Some of the more charitable commentators might have thought, well, it's the stress getting to him, he needs a break. Clearly, he's sinking faster than the Titanic with a deck full of lead weights. It was like he'd invoked his inner Boris Johnson. He thought to himself, if I can lie with as much gay abandon as Bozo could, I can pull this out of the bag. Because he's a winner. Rather than accepting the fact he was a dangerous charlatan, we all now see through, or most of us, except the extremely batshit ones, only interested in self-gratification as he was, who wanted all the privilege of becoming Prime Minister without having to do any of the work. But still it seems to me that this is Sunak's strategy, and he's clearly run it past his own cabinet, and they appear to have ended up in full agreement, because come this conference, they're all at it. And it has almost turned into a performance as to who can come up with the most absurd pack of lies going, like they've got some sort of a prize pot at the end of the conference for the minister who gets away with the most crackers piece of policy announcement or smear on the opposition. People are suffering in poverty, cursed with failing services, and these idiots think it's a game, grinning as they lie through their teeth. Perhaps I'm looking at it wrongly, though. Perhaps it's more of the opposite is true. Sunak can't govern to save his life, can't even maintain control of his party because he is an absolute weakling. He's had 2 rival Tory factions draw up their own manifestos at this conference, and fringe event speakers like Liz Truss have won bigger audiences than his ministers have, unless they happen to be utterly deranged already, like Suella Braverman was, who did manage to pack out the main hall yesterday. Perhaps the lying is a parody of what Sunak did the other week. Perhaps They're all in on bringing him down as soon as his 1-year grace period as leader is over. Are enough letters of no confidence in to trigger him as soon as he's no longer safe? And ministers are positioning themselves away from him by being so ridiculous. Well, it seems a bit far-fetched, but then this is the Tory party. Who would put anything past them? But, if so, they're quite mad to be bringing their own reputations down meanwhile. But then I can't quite fathom the mentality of people who join and campaign for the Tory party to start with. But that's just me. They must appeal to somebody, though, even if they never appeal to me. At any rate, with lies such as we've heard, I'm struggling to see how anyone could be stupid enough to believe any of it. One of the first to stand up and talk utter nonsense was somebody most Tories actually considered one of the more sensible ones. But what he went on to say was nuts. Mark Harper is the current Transport Secretary, and he made up a load of guff concerning so-called 15-minute city, which is a planning concept conceived by a Colombian urbanist called Carlos Moreno, where basically the shops, the parks, the doctor, etc. are all provided within a 15-minute walk of residential neighbourhoods. Less reliance on public transport or private cars is the idea, all much more environmentally friendly and healthy for us all as we all get out and walk instead. Not according to Mark Harper, it's not. He claimed it was a United Nations plot to keep us all in our own homes and that local councils would ration road use and would be able to dictate when we could go to the shops and when we couldn't. And he also made claims saying we're all going to be subjected to blanket 20-mile-an-hour speed limits when these have only been used to date, subject to local conditions. Michael Gove was less imaginative when he got up to speak as Levelling Up Secretary because he decided to rake up we got Brexit done with a rehash on that old classic, because he stood up and said, Brexit has been delivered and membership of the world's fastest growing trade bloc secured. That'll be their CPTPP trade deal worth peanuts compared to what we have with the EU. But anyway, he continued, and there is now more than £350 million extra a week for our NHS. Yes, he literally wheeled out Boris Johnson's bus promise as if it was empirical fact, rather than the biggest and most blatant lie of the entire Brexit campaign. He got applause to it. So if I'm wondering who could be so stupid as to be sucked in by all of this, well, they were sat in the audience. Claire Coutinho, the new Energy and Net Zero Minister who took over from Grant Shapps when he got shuffled off the defence, is someone for whom lying ought to come quite naturally, not just because she's a Tory, but because she was also a senior fellow at the right-wing, oil giant-funded right-wing think tank Policy Exchange in 2021. So she's sure to be for reducing fossil fuels, isn't she? Not. As just last week she accused climate change zealots of actually being the biggest threat to net zero themselves, not the fact a former think tanker beholden to fossil fuels being in charge of weaning the country off our use of fossil fuels might be. At any rate, she brought up Sunak's meat tax again as a swipe at Starmer, saying in her speech, it's no wonder Labour are so relaxed about taxing meat. Sir Keir Starmer doesn't eat it, and Ed Miliband is clearly scarred after his encounter with a bacon sandwich. Oh, he, titter ye not. I'll be the first in line to rinse Starmer and co over their dishonesty and lies. Get in the queue. But given there's so much to choose from already, why make up ones that aren't actually true, Claire? Oh, well, she sat there smugly talking to Sophie Ridge about this comment, utterly unapologetic, thinking she was so smart and so clever, and gleefully admitting she'd written it herself because it's so witty and funny. The biggest show of dishonesty, and easily the most dangerous one, has come from Suella Braverman's speech yesterday, which was as horrifying as it was dishonest. She referred to our human rights and the Human Rights Act that enshrines them all in law as criminal, and saying it should be called the Criminal Rights Act. Well, which ones should be illegal then? Right to life? Right to get married? Right to a free trial? Or a fair trial even? She attacked wokeism, which is just being aware of what shit the likes of her are pulling, and I'm perfectly happy to be woke. It's better than being a walking multi-pack of see you next Tuesdays like she is. She made transphobic comments, she made homophobic comments, and it was so bad. The one chap, a guy called Andrew Boff, a Conservative member of the London Assembly no less, so an elected Tory official himself, got thrown out of her speech for calling it homophobic and saying she was talking trash about gender ideology. Then, of course, there were her claims of a hurricane of migrants coming here, reminiscent of David Cameron calling them a swarm. When if Braverman, a second-generation immigrant herself, wants to make wind analogies, she's about as welcome in a position of power as a fart in a lift. She is as disgusting and dangerous as she is dishonest, grotesque, wannabe fascist who left that stage to rapturous applause. Terrifying, frankly. Rounding the day off yesterday, you had Michelle Donnellan on Newsnight getting the Victoria Derbyshire treatment. The only BBC News anchor I actually credit with an ounce of integrity. Donnellan, the science minister, told Derbyshire that her party is the party of facts. Facts? Really? What next then? You, the science minister, you're going to go on stage and tell us the earth is flat or something? She got confronted with the lies of Mark Harper and Claire Coutinho and went off on one saying people had been calling for a meat tax. That said, she did come out with the most honest statement of the entire conference spectacle by also saying on that programme that her party should stand up for divisiveness and promote hatred more, but even that was a Freudian slip, alas. Facts, she says. What a donut. I don't know how Sunak will top this. He hasn't spoken at time of writing. Perhaps he'll escalate to 10 bins. I'll have a look at it and have a watch later. I will put myself through that so you don't have to. I have no idea what he's currently saying at this moment in time. Functionally, though, this conference has been a display of disunity, dangerous lies, and a culture building up that by inventing stories about non-existent policies, the Tories think they can win an election by pretending to have done things they haven't. As much as critics and opponents of the current right-wing Labour leader are, like me, about his lies and pledge breaking, it'll get lost in the noise of how insane the Tory party now sounds. They have zero credibility now. They've nothing to offer at all. They're heading towards electoral oblivion, and they seem to want to go out by telling the biggest lies they've ever told. What have you made of the conference coverage, though? Have you put yourself through watching some of it? Have you picked up the odd bits from social media? What has been your biggest takeaway from it? Do let me know in the comments and be part of the conversation. For my money, Keir Starmer ought to be delighted. But he's got his own conference next week. He might not want to get too gleeful too quickly, especially if his conference becomes peppered with a pack of lies itself. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Jeremy Corbyn at least has gone after Suella Braverman for her fascistic tendencies. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so this Saturday, on the eve of Labour Party conference, as Keir Starmer leaves his Westminster bubble and heads to Liverpool, where I sincerely hope he gets a proper Scouse welcome, back in London, activists opposed to Starmer's Tory lightism and incessant lies are kicking off their concerted opposition to him. And it really does say an awful lot about how widely the man is detested by ordinary working class political activists, that even before he's managed to reach a position of power, protests are now beginning to spring up to remove him. And not only that, but separate groups that have independently appeared in order to do so are now joining forces and unifying in that common goal, which is to see Starmer lose his seat at the next general election, thereby removing the threat to the country, equal if not more so to that presented by Rishi Sunak and his blue Tories that a Starmer-led government presents. Right, so Keir Starmer, Sir Kid Starmer, goodness knows regular viewers know I'm no fan, but I'm far from alone in that either. And come this Saturday, 7th of October, moves to bring Starmer down begin. If you want to be a part of that, well, you'll need to get yourself down to Mornington Crescent Tube Station by 11 a.m. and join in with the launch of this. You see, while Starmer disappears to his heavily clamped down on conference in Liverpool, where he is also readily despised, unforgiven for writing incessantly for Rupert Murdoch and his scum rag, a conference where delegates have already been told what they can and cannot talk about, what they can and cannot bring motions on, certain policy aspects, giving an insight into the authoritarian and dictatorial aspects of Starmer's administration and how they would in all likelihood run the country too. Those opposed to being gagged like that, those who will talk about such things whether Starmer likes it or not, but above all else talking about how to bring this man and what he stands for, whatever that happens to be from 1 minute to the next, down, begins in his own constituency of Holborn and St Pancras whilst he's not home. Now this event is a venture between two anti-Starmer organisations, Stop Starmer and Okiza, and it's been organised by not the Andrew Marr Show host Crispin Flintoff. Stop Starmer began as a group of people who see Starmer for what he is, are fearful of the sort of country, the kind of rule we'll see if he ends up elected to power, and with much of the media giving Starmer the softest of soft rides, implying he very much is the establishment choice now. They are committed to getting the word out about him in ways the media refuse to, except for media outlets on the left who are also under Starmer, not least of which includes mouthpieces like me. Okiza, they're focused on Starmer's constituency in and of itself. They are absolutely on the same page as Stop Starmer. They are organising to stop Starmer from being re-elected as MP for Holborn and St Pancras. Stop the Tories and any other neoliberal party from winning there as well, because the country is going down that right-wing dominated drain, and far too many people are sleepwalking into that because they aren't being made aware. They aren't hearing what Starmer is doing, how he's acting, except what they get drip-fed selectively by newspapers and the TV and radio media. Neither of these organisations are political parties in themselves, nor do they wish to be. They are not standing for election themselves. It's great to see this joint venture happening between two distinct groups who happen to share a common goal. They are just two groups of ordinary people fighting for change to be elected instead, refusing to accept another mealy-mouthed, empty suit in it for the paycheck and not the work that needs doing. And by taking out Starmer as the Labour leader, by focusing on him, it will send an important message to the rest of the Labour Party that they need to think again about trying to carry on in this vein regardless. Be warned, Labour right. So if that sounds like something fair and reasonable, and you've got spare time in your hands on Saturday morning, get your backside down to Mornington Crescent Tube Station. Think about it this way. You might read alternative media or watch videos like mine and know a bit about Starmer and be on to him a bit, but we're in the minority here. National polling shows we are definitely in the minority here. Unless you literally are pointing out to people the sheer lack of principles he has, the belief that Labour must be better than the Tories, and we need to vote Labour to get the Tories out, will remain an ingrained thought amongst most of the populace. The 10 pledges he made to get elected Labour leader, how many people do you know realise he's binned every single last one of them? How many think he's still on the left, the heir to Corbyn, rather than the self-proclaimed Blair on steroids he now claims to be? Put someone on the spot and ask what policies he has, and you'll struggle to find anyone who has a clue, really. Most of them he won't tell us. Others he's bidding on the basis he claims we can't afford them any longer. Starmer stands up and says what he thinks people want to hear at any one given time, and then backtracks when it no longer matters, when it's not politically expedient to him any longer. Renationalisation of energy and water, house building, reversing the privatisation that has happened in our NHS, improving rights for disabled people. He's backtracked on every last one of those and a heck of a lot more. He was, until recently, a member of the Trilateral Commission, which is an organisation that believes there is such a thing as too much democracy. And when you see his authoritarianism within his own party, it isn't hard to see why he fitted in with them so well. But so many people don't know this or can't see it. He purports to stand for the party of the workers, yet prefers to hang out at the World Economic Forum than be in Westminster. His words. He once stood up and said the buck stops with him, but the buck never stops with him. He always blames someone else, including over such incidents as Jimmy Savile, despite him ordering a review of the case in 2011. So he was involved directly in that case, albeit later, as Director of Public Prosecutions. In fact, there are many glaring questions to ask of his time as DPP, working with US and British intelligence, persisting in the attempted extradition of Julian Assange, exonerating the Met over the killing of Jean-Charles de Menezes, and rule changes within the Crown Prosecution Service, largely seen as pointless by the very people that work there. And it all brings into question his competence as a leader. Since taking over as Labour leader, he has purged those he disagrees with, turning the Labour Party into a rump of what it once was, and those left are largely nodding yes men, sacking and deselecting MPs who challenge him, are not on the right, suspending others, taking over local party organisation, killing off the good work many have been doing in their communities, and blocking local members choosing who represents them, inflicting right-wingers upon them whether they like it or not. He has already pledged to support any US foreign invasion or war, just as his idol Tony Blair did before him. He remains advised by Blairites, and the most notable of those has been the mate of Jeffrey Epstein, Peter Mandelson. He has weaponised anti-Semitism to within an inch of its life, doing enormous damage to the fight against the real thing, and is in favour of clamping down on free speech, especially online, meaning critics in the media who are supporting the likes of Stop Starmer and O'Keefe could end up stopped themselves. And the public as a whole will be forcibly dumbed down again in another war on woke, with the only news allowed being that which Starmer permits to exist. So much of this, I'm sure you who are watching this will know already, but so many people out there, so many more than just we, few, do not. So first and foremost, please share this video so more people can see it and get the word out about this event. But the biggest thing people can do is get out there on Saturday and join that campaign. Also, join up to Stop Starmer at stopstarmer.co.uk and O'Keefe at okeefe.org.uk. And this is really important, because the biggest weapon these groups have, that we all have, against Starmer and his media friends and his established interests, is ourselves. Well, Starmer lacks, through his own actions, through driving so many members and supporters of the Labour Party away. It's the one thing the Labour Party has always previously been able to rely on, and that is its ground game. That is boots on the ground. That is having conversations. That is manning street stalls. That is posting leaflets through letterboxes. And remember, this is all about targeting one MP in one seat. It's quite a concentrated effort. It's about one constituency being warned about their particular MP, who just happens to also be the leader of the Labour Party and potentially the next Prime Minister. Because that one-on-one approach, that personal approach, well, it doesn't matter how many times he might go on TV or his acolytes will and defend him and promote him. Word of mouth with the people who actually vote for him, where it matters, cuts through far harder, much deeper, makes a much greater impression. Mornington Crescent Tube Station, Saturday the 7th of October, 11 a.m. If Starmer strikes you as a wrong 'un, if he scares you, if you fear he'll just preside over another Tory government, you can get there. Don't regret not going and be part of it. Be part of forcing a change the whole country will be grateful to you for. Right, so on Monday the 9th of October at 5 p.m. at the Casa Bar on Hope Street in Liverpool, whilst Keir Starmer's Labour in name-only conference goes on nearby, socialism will actually be on the table as a new alliance of grassroots organisations kicks off in the most socialist of all cities. So where better could this begin? And named after the most famous of Jeremy Corbyn phrases, for the many, not the few. The For the Many Network, as they are calling themselves, is a brand new initiative being launched and supported by some big names in socialist circles to bring back some hope amongst all the despair so many are feeling with the state the country is in and the political prospects currently set before us. This isn't the launch of a new party, by the way. The word network is the key here, for its intentions are to connect activists from inside and outside the Labour Party, other progressive parties, trade unions, other political organisations, particularly those involved in the biggest struggles ordinary people are facing, from climate change to right to food to migrant action and more. And you can tell how large the appetite for all of this is because the live event is booking up very, very fast. If you can get there, if you're sick of the apparent hopelessness that is enveloping people up and down the country as they look from one political party doing nothing to help them to another saying barely anything different, then this just might be what you've been looking for quite some time. Right, so the live launch night in Liverpool is booking up fast, folks. But of course, this is going to be so much more than just a launch night. There's a movement to build. There's campaigning to be done again. There's tasks at hand that are being set out, which I'll come on to in a moment. But if you think this is just going to be another nice idea, never quite gets off the ground, well, it's got some serious big-name backers ready to get this off the ground and then some. The event is being chaired by local Liverpool legend and activist Audrey White, God bless her. The lady who got bundled off by security when she cornered Starmer in a cafe. You must remember the video. It went absolutely viral. She gave him such a hard time, he didn't know where to look. He was even eyeing up the window as a potential exit, it seemed at one. But then, when you write for the Murdoch scum and then you think to go to Liverpool, do you really think the people there will let that pass? He's chanced his arm again this year at conference on that score, but who knows? He'll probably have more security, so scary pensioners don't go after him again. She'll be comparing this event for assorted other guests, including Jewish former ANC politician Andrew Feinstein, film director Ken Loach will be there, Jewish Voice for Labour's Naomi Wimborne-Idrissi, along with Firebrand Bakers Union President Ian Hodson himself, and a damn sight more besides. The whole thing is free to attend, but obviously there's a numbers limit, so get those tickets whilst they're hot. So what's the purpose of this then, Damo? Well, we've no hope on the horizon anymore, do we? And we've all manner of issues to fix. Public services need proper investment, they're not getting it. Insecurity at work, poverty, hunger, mental health and anxiety across the population, all in a world where people are, well, more disconnected from each other than ever before. Where people used to talk to each other, they now sit staring at their phones. We've become too insular, and when societal issues such as these require us to come together again, in ways that we once did in order to oppose oppression, well, we need to break those barriers down again, don't we? Imagine we had a battle of cable streets scenario happening again, for instance. If you listen to Suella Braverman Rabbiton at conference, you can be forgiven for thinking this is now a distinct possibility, where once upon a time a neighbourhood came out to oppose fascism in their very streets. If that happened today, would people act today as they did then, or would they just stay in and watch Strictly instead? As much as I'd hope something so extreme as that, quite an extreme example, would be opposed, and perhaps it still would be, is it as likely? We don't stand by those being forced to use food banks, do we? So they're become normalised. We don't stand by migrants despite them being forced onto a Legionella-ridden prison barge. We see significant protests being organised through the streets of London for one thing or another. But we don't see the country coming together as we once did anymore. The poll tax demos happening across the country, for instance. We don't see that sort of thing anymore. We don't see that sort of societal collectivism happening. So a network designed to overcome that barrier seems like it's needed in this day and age to me. And that is exactly what the purpose of For the Many Network is. Good people will always fight back, but helping them get together and unite and get conversations going has to happen first. Otherwise, good people will pass each other by in the street. Let's support those in poverty, as well as those trapped earning their own poverty, trapped in jobs that don't pay enough. Let's help others being let down, from health workers to teachers. Let's support strike action by joining those striking on the picket lines too. Let's do a bit more than just beeping our horns as we go past them. But to organise that, we need something to organise around. And so For the Many Network plans to start operating community hubs around the country. These hubs will be made up of For the Many Network members, elected to given positions for periods of 12 months at a time, who have signed up to a founding charter, their principles, and begin engaging with local communities, create space for discussions, hold public meetings, build campaigns, provide speakers and train others to speak at public events, all on the issues that matter to the community where they are, helping local people become organised, meet each other and build a local movement. This will extend also to speaking to political parties, engaging with members thereof and of other organisations, and indeed the organisations themselves who also choose to sign up to that charter. They will then be able to sport a For the Many Network logo, which will be considered the gold standard for bringing people back into politics and improving lives. Hubs will be connected to each other via national organisation. Again, I'll say this is not a political party, but what this is a social movement. It will provide campaigning materials, it will help train organisers, it will create events bringing hubs and organisations together. Organisation will be at local and at national levels. It is everything a left-wing For the Workers Party ought to be doing, but can no longer be relied upon to do so. And the only condition is to sign up to 12 principles, proper meaningful ones that won't be binned in 5 minutes flat the minute the wind changes. For the Many Network is committing itself to public ownership of all public services and infrastructure, including utilities and transport, a national health and social care service fully funded from progressive taxation, which employs directly all who work in it, no subcontracting and no outsourcing. A major programme of council house building and regeneration to solve the housing crisis and to create communities that are sustainable both environmentally and socially. High quality state education to ensure all have an equal opportunity to fulfil their potential without incurring the burden of debt, and an end to privatisation, for example academies and outsourcing. Access to sports, leisure facilities and the arts available to all. We want bread and roses too. Full employment rights for all workers from the first day of employment, and the repeal of anti-trade union legislation in order to return power to union members. A new welfare state in which those in need are not forced into poverty, and in which public service and the public good replace private greed in our national life. Justice system available to everyone regardless of wealth, and the protection of civil liberties such as freedom of speech and the right to protest. Protection of the environment with a serious plan for a just transition to a sustainable green economy fit for purpose to confront the impending catastrophe facing people and the planet. Uncompromising opposition to all forms of racism and discrimination. A foreign policy committed unequivocally to work for peace, the rule of international law and universal human rights, the rights of refugees, and a fair, non-racialised immigration system. Transformation of the economic system in the interests of the people, not corporate power, so that workers by hand or by brain receive the full fruits of their industry. There is so much more to come from this. How can you not sign up and agree to those responses, though? It's a proper, organised response to the gaping failure in our politics to address the needs of ordinary people up and down the country, very much in the continued ethos of For the Many, not the Few, building a future for all. If you were won over by that thinking, that change back then by Jeremy Corbyn, that better way of doing things, then you need to see this too. Check out For the Many Network on Facebook and at @forthemany_net on Twitter for more. We need to bring back transformative politics in a big way. We came together before when we were enthused and inspired to do so, so let yourself be enthused and inspired again here and now. Right, so Tory conference is thankfully over. Will we have to ever tolerate another Rishi Sunak-led washout like that again before the next election? I somehow doubt it, not least of which after that speech, after this spectacle. I'll be amazed if Sunak is still leader by next autumn. Sunak's speech was a blame game from end to end, with all the grit and determination of a sixth form debate club newbie, but putting his completely unelected wife, with all the scandal that has come out in recent months because of her, just served to remind us that no matter how much blame Sunak wants to apportion to others, much of the mess he's made is for himself and his reputation amongst voters, sponsored by Infosys even, as he seems to be. Well, Akshata Murthy's presence just served to remind us all of that before Sunak himself even uttered a single word. It seems to me that Sunak firmly believes now that lies don't matter, as long as his lies dominate those of the opposition. Right, so Sunak's speech began even before he'd made it to the stage himself, as he began with a word from his sponsors, also known as his wife, Akshata Murthy, she of the Infosys shares fame. New oil and gas licences in the North Sea. Oh, yes, please. Oh, look, Infosys have IT contracts with Shell and BP. Budget sweetener for childminders, doubled if they sign up to a chosen government provider, one of which Sunak's wife happens to have shares in. Oh, the coincidence. Non-dom status, despite being married to the then Chancellor Rishi Sunak, living here in the UK, had children here in the UK in order to avoid paying tax on those Infosys shares. Whoops! What an oversight, silly me. What am I like? And Sunak tried to tell us he could be trusted with the nation's purse strings whilst denying any knowledge of his own household finances. Akshata Murthy taking the stage ahead of her husband simply served to remind us all about all of that, about Sunak's own role in things, and might not have been the endearing, saccharine, sweet puff piece it was intended to be. For many, it was a reminder of just how deceitful, particularly when it comes to his own personal wealth, that Sunak can be. For a conference that has been marked by gaffe after gaffe, from Steve Barclay going transphobe in blocking trans women from female wards and declaring a war on pronouns amongst health workers, to Michael Gove claiming the NHS is getting that £350 million a week extra that was written on the side of Bozo's bus, to Mark Harper claiming local councils will stop you going shopping when you want to, lies and conspiracy theories and madness so blatant you must have the IQ of a mushroom to believe any of it. All of it about as honest as one of Nadim Zahawi's tax returns, combined with all the humanity of the Terminator. Sunak went into that speech basically having already lost the next election, and he put the final nail in the coffin with that speech. Keir Starmer will be dancing with glee off the back of that, and as much as I still believe polls will tighten the more people get to see of Starmer, as intensely dislikable and wooden and indeed dishonest as he is, Sunak, I don't think, is capable of leading a Tory party that can hope for anything more than damage limitation anymore. He can't win. Look at it this way. He's had two factions within his own party produce rival manifestos that they want him to sign up to. He can't please both, even if he intends to please one over the other. So there's more enemies, more division within his own ranks. As far as speeches go, this conference will be remembered for the insanity of Liz Truss and the rabid hatred espoused by Suella Braverman, whose faction, the ERG, has basically been pulling Sunak's strings from day one that he got the job. She and her ilk have pulled Sunak ever rightwards, so that now that the hard right fringe of the Conservative Party, which used to be kept on the outside, well, they're now the mainstream of the Conservative Party. So it isn't hard when you look at Starmer and how right-wing he's become, how he's followed on with things, despite still being called a lefty by some commentators, basically being viewed by those of us with perhaps a bit more of a critical eye for him and his carbon copy in female form Rachel Reeves, as being the next David Cameron and George Osborne, though hopefully minus the pig's head. Sunak had his major announcements in his speech, though, didn't he? Though most had already been leaked to the press, so they weren't too surprising. HS2 is now going to stop at Birmingham. It might as well now stop at Watford for all the money that has been spaffed on it and the waste of time and energy it now is. Apparently the money saved, though, will be used for other infrastructure projects. But where? Where's the detail? Where's the white paper about that? You've made an announcement on this. Where's the basis for it? Where is it written down in black and white somewhere? Well, it doesn't. It isn't, because it doesn't exist. Let's look at what he said about schools instead then. A-levels and T-levels are getting scrapped to be replaced by something he's calling an Advanced British Standard, or ABS, and now our kids are aspiring to earn qualifications named after a braking system. Well, the irony hasn't been lost on me. For 13 years of Tory rule, the brakes have well and truly been applied to this country, and to hope and to aspiration and to economic benefits of us all. Students studying at that level will now also have to study 5 subjects instead of 3, and some form of English or maths study will be compulsory until age 18. This will obviously need more teachers then, obviously. Instead of paying the ones we still have that are hanging in on the job and haven't left in disgust and despair, it's now a 30k bribe to new teachers over the first 5 years of their careers. It didn't take long for this to be completely shredded by teaching union the NEU, who have helpfully pointed out that the country is currently short of 4,300 maths teachers and 2,600 English teachers. And Sunak's new qualification and new plans and all this extra education he says he wants to bring in would require another 5,300 teachers across the board. Where are they coming from? Also, and possibly more to the point, that fiddling once again with qualification reform, where are these kids going to be taught when schools are still falling down around their ears due to rack concrete issues? Nothing said about that whatsoever. Again, just as with the HS2 announcement, there's no sound basis for any of it though. No plans, no budget. It doesn't exist. Then on health, he spoke about banning smoking. Tax revenue from the tobacco industry for the last year was £10 billion in the UK. If you think Sunak, a Tory, will happily lose that, you really don't understand the Tories. You were born yesterday. Greed is their god, money is their idol. They won't intentionally ditch it, no matter what the benefits of doing so to the health of the nation might be. Besides which, you might sense a theme here, there's again no white paper, no plan, nothing written down, even on the back of a fag packet, outlining how this would be delivered. If you're buying into any of what has been said at this conference, whether it be by Sunak or by one of his other minions, you've been smoking something a little bit stronger than tobacco. It's funny he can bleat about stuff like this though, but not more money for ordinary people to help us and boost the economy as us going out and spending it does. Cost of living crisis is still going on. Inflation isn't a tax. He needs to keep being reminded of that lie of his, of course. So how are you helping us out, given that you've all this money for all these infrastructure and legislative projects, apparently, somewhere, down the back of your own sofa, possibly, you're rich enough, projects that'll take years to deliver, even if you do mean them, yet no cash for anything that we actually need help with right now, like putting food in bellies and roofs over heads. Nothing meaningful is changing. You're not promising to change anything that we actually need to change, that we want to see change. And yet, despite having been in power for 13 years, you preposterously announce that you either think this country needs change or you don't, but if you do, you should vote Conservative. Well, we've certainly seen change. You've chased off the people who kept our essential services running, defunded those services as well, have driven the disabled and long-term sick to their deaths, and tens of thousands of others as well through pandemic mishandling. You've lied, you've cheated, and you've obfuscated, leaving an economy that has now been flatlining for years and made things even worse by ballsing up our exit from the EU. So sure, things have changed, and it's such a rotten, despairing shame that should we hopefully get you out of power, the party taking over, in all likelihood, won't do any different from what you're doing now. Sunak's speech was actually so bad, it was criminal at one point. And as if to underline that, he's even been reported to the police over it. He thought it funny to say of former SNP leader and First Minister Nicola Sturgeon wanted to go down in the history books as the woman who broke up our country, but it now looks like she may go down for very different reasons. Really? Well, Sturgeon was obviously arrested in relation to SNP finances back in June. We know about that. She was also released without charge. But Sunak had to have a dig at that, make a joke in relation to his commitment to the union. Now this case, however, is ongoing still. It's a live investigation, and Sunak making such a comment about it as this, crass, even if intended as a joke, places him potentially in contempt of court, much like Suella Braverman found herself just last week defending the police officer facing charges for fatally shooting an unarmed black man while that case is ongoing. He's been reported to Police Scotland in relation to this speech of his by the Alba party, so it'll be interesting to see if that goes anywhere. It's got more chance in Scotland, I dare say, than it would if the Met were investigating, I fancy. Besides, innocent until proven guilty and all of that, Rishi. Mr. 2 fixed penalty notices for breaking the law as proven in your own case. Hey, come the next couple of weeks, we'll quite possibly see a leadership challenge, I reckon. I think it's looking likelier than ever, especially if Labour get a boost in the polls off their conference, or even more hilariously, if they got a boost off of this one. I really can't see how the Tories have benefited from this absolute shambles. Rishi Sunak himself certainly hasn't. As ever, do join in the conversation on this. What are your thoughts on Tory conference and this latest example of Tory idiocy from their mandateless, unelected burk of a leader? Agree with my thoughts or no? If not, what are your own thoughts? Do tell me. Let me know. I always like to read them and find out what my viewers are thinking. But thank you very much for watching anyway. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where ahead of this conference, Sunak decided to attack doctors who were going on strike again. Once more having to strike to save the service, underfunded and understaffed as it is. But despite that staffing crisis, Sunak thinks threatening them with the sack is the answer. Well, where are you getting their replacements then from? He's an idiot. We need rid of him. And I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Keir Starmer can't seem to even let the Tories ruin themselves with their own conference fallout without taking the heat off them with idiocy of his own, as he has proven beyond all doubt that the claims that deselections of sitting MPs and socialist candidates and takeovers of local constituency Labour parties are necessary in order to deliver the highest quality candidates are complete nonsense. Nothing quite gives that away like a healthy dose of nepotism, not even parachuting a candidate in from one end of the country to the other, although that is exactly what is happening here in this instance too, because selected to stand for Labour in the seat of Stockton West in County Durham is the London-based boyfriend of Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting. Right, so Labour parliamentary selection processes. There's been more rigging going on there than in the tall ships race, hasn't there? But the convenience of Wes Streeting's partner, Joe Dancy, being selected to stand for the northeastern seat of Stockton West, a new seat being created by boundary changes, is pretty much as on the nose as you can possibly get here. If you Google search this guy, you pretty much just get wall-to-wall Wes Streeting stories, so it's not exactly a well-kept secret here. But it means there's not a lot known about his partner himself. Not that a great deal more is needed to be known for people to think, well, this stinks worse than weak old fish, when the partner of a sitting right-wing Starmer loyalist MP gets picked for a seat miles away from where they're based. Strap on that parachute and fly, son! Fly! Well, first, let's get one thing out of the way in regards to this. Dancy grew up in this constituency, so there is a connection there. But he left. He apparently works as a political consultant. He's certainly listed as a director of PR at strategy firm Endeavour Advisory Limited, based in London. And although he claims to divide his time between London and the North East, he owns a house with Streeting in the capital, so that is where he is based, and presumably where he would remain should he be elected. Streeting is a London MP. I would imagine political consultancy is certainly more in demand in London than in Stockton. Would he have to give that up, perhaps? Is he under pressure to end his second job, as it would be in Starmer's regime, should he be elected? Well, can you imagine people second jobbing under Keir Starmer? Well, I never. At any rate, so how is his time is divided as Dancy claims it to be between London and the North East is an open question. It'd be one heck of a commute to work, though, if he became the Stockton West MP, wouldn't it? The only article I have found in a cursory Google search referring to Dancy actually being in the North East doing something was a 2012 article where he was involved in the organising of the 2012 Olympic Games, working as an executive assistant to Tory Lord Sebastian Coe, and Dancy happened to visit a Teesside school as part of that, covered by a local paper. Dancy was also apparently a former special advisor to the Prince of Darkness and buddy of child sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein, Peter Mandelson. Yes, he's up in the story again as well. He's involved, is he not? Does he not always have sticky fingers in too many pies when it comes to Labour these days? Mandelson's still inexplicably an advisor to Keir Starmer as he is, but then unless the mainstream press are screaming about it, people won't demand answers about such things. And right now, with Starmer seemingly the chosen one by establishment interests, once again that easy ride the media love to give him, he's not being troubled by things like Mandelson still being on his payroll, which should have people asking quite justifiable questions about that. But aside from anything else, Dancy is without doubt yet another right-winger, yet another Starmer loyalist, with connections such as these, another yes-man who will do as he is told and vote accordingly. Now, Stockton West being a new constituency, there isn't as such a local Labour CLP involved here, because the changes happening to the seat are great enough that regional and national Labour Party involvement has presumably taken place here, taken over, as rules permit. Even so, I was looking for some kind of local outcry. I took to the Stockton South Labour Twitter account. It's Stockton South that is going to become Stockton West by and large with the changes that are happening. That's the current constituency that's going to disappear. And they don't appear to have posted anything since 2020. Their Facebook page is a little better. The only post since June being the announcement of their new PPC Joe Dancy, shared by all of 8 people as it was. Dancy was shortlisted for the position along with just one other person, Emma Scott Spivey, who was Labour's former candidate for the post of North Yorkshire Police and Crime Commissioner. She's a student paramedic who has also tried to get selected for the constituency of York Outer. So she must be feeling delighted to have been overlooked in favour of London-based Wes Streeting's boyfriend. However, equally, the Labour members of Stockton West must be delighted they got the choice between a York-based woman such as she or London-based candidate such as Wes Streeting's partner to choose from. Michael Crick, who runs the Tomorrow's MPs account on Twitter, has remarked that this habit of shortlisting candidates down to just 2, as has happened here, is becoming more and more common, not least of which to ensure strong contenders are kept out. And he said that in relation to this particular selection, which prompted me to look back a little bit more. And well, there were shenanigans, it seems. Nominations for the seat opened on the 24th of August, and 3 other people who had initially thrown their hats in the ring for this selection were failed, basically, before they got to that shortlisting point. And one of those, notably, was Hartlepool by-election candidate Dr. Paul Williams. You might remember the Hartlepool by-election. He of favourite Tory MILF fame, as he became known. He didn't make the cut for Stockton at all, presumably because he failed in Hartlepool. But the other 2 candidates were more interesting and more to the point local. By early September, they hadn't had enough candidates put themselves forward for this seat, so more people were encouraged to apply. Local distiller Jay Byers was one who answered the call, only to be told later on at the shortlisting stage that he wasn't the right type. Well, that's a nice thing to say to one of your own members, isn't it? He collects for charity, he's a local businessman, and the shortlist being reduced to the bare minimum of 2, and given who those 2 were, sounds like a fix. The other potential, a guy called Pete Bowyer, stood down after getting ripped to bits for encouraging people to vote for the Lib Dems and Change UK to bring down Corbyn. Frankly, you'd think there would be a shortlisting guarantee for Team Keith, but he didn't stay in the race to find out. He's voiced his support for Joe Dancy on Facebook, though, which says it all. Local objection has been muted, it would appear. Starmer has imposed another loyalist on another constituency, loose local connection notwithstanding. It's just the latest example, though, of a longer and longer growing list of the Labour Party being forced in a rightward direction by the Red Tory leadership and imposing candidates they deem suitable. What do you think, though? Will it be Starmer's wife or somebody imposed somewhere next? They seem to be getting more and more blatant in their cronyism, and of course, it's not getting picked up by our mainstream media. They are ignoring it. So where will it end other than no representation for the left in the Labour Party anymore at all? Take my advice. Go Green. You're allowed to be a rotten lefty and a socialist with them. That's where I'd be putting my vote in Stockton West for sure now. But do let me know your thoughts on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Thanks as ever for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where if more Wes Streetings is the answer, then you must be asking the wrong question, a very, very wrong question. But Streeting appears to be the mould election candidates are being cast in these days, as shown in another video back in June, and I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so let's make no bones about it. Labour had a thumping win in the Rutherglen and Hamiton West by-election yesterday. But actually, when you drill down through all the media noise about what this might mean, the pollsters saying Labour will win back Scotland from the SNP on these numbers, this victory has no solid foundations, given the win actually had nothing to do with Starmer, nothing to do with Labour. Yes, there is this huge swing, but based on what? The party of Keir Starmer and Anna Sarwar contributed nothing, in fact, towards this win. They're simply the beneficiaries of a variety of other issues affecting other parties. As such, any talk of a general election victory extrapolated from this one result will be built on similarly rocky foundations, no matter what the mainstream talking heads might say. Right, so first things first, there's no avoiding it. Labour won the Rutherglen and Hamiton West by-election emphatically on a 20.4% swing from the SNP to Labour. And given how closely contested the seat has been in recent years, that headline figure is hard to ignore. And needless to say, the mainstream media certainly are not ignoring it, falling over themselves to say what would happen if this was rolled out across the whole of Scotland. An opportunity to mock the SNP, I suppose, as they appear to cheer the fact that on these figures, if rolled out across the whole of Scotland, Labour would end up at the next general election with 38 or 39 Scottish seats, with the SNP reduced to just 6 or 7. Depends on which outlet you happen to be looking at, depends on which analyses they've used. Starmer's Labour, together with its Scottish branch office, would be the biggest party north of the border. The trouble is, this is one set of stats though, here and now, which may not carry out to whenever the next general election comes, because we don't know when that's going to be. So although this is as accurate a poll as you can possibly have, it really does only relate to Rutherglen and Hamiton West, not the whole of Scotland, and it only applies as a snapshot at this moment in time. And I also say that because there are a multitude of different reasons behind why Labour actually won, and here in this constituency specifically. But their own conduct, their own actions, their own policies certainly aren't one of them. We have a Labour Party right now that's committed to keeping child poverty, that's committed to leaving the disabled without the representation they've been promised, that is, as a leadership that is taking donations from private health, flipping the bird in effect to saving the NHS. You cannot trust our health service with Labour anymore, the party that created it. They're referring to migrant families as terrorists. Explain to me exactly how all of this isn't the sort of thing Sunak would actually put forward. But as I said in a video yesterday, it doesn't appear to be an issue how badly politicians lie anymore, because when they're all doing it, lying no longer ends up mattering anymore. It's just about who shouts loudest and shrillest and who seems to say the daftest, most unbelievable things now. Put it this way, even Professor John Curtis has commented, saying one thing this by-election clearly wasn't down to was Labour policy, when that's exactly what it always should be about. So let's do some analysis of our own, if that's the case. What are the real reasons for this Labour win? Well, let's start with the SNP. They are in all manner of trouble nationally in Scotland, but their name is particularly muddy in Rutherglen and Hamiton West. The by-election was triggered, after all, in order to remove the former SNP MP, who had been squatting unwanted there as an independent, Margaret Ferrier, following her being found criminally culpable in breaching COVID-19 guidelines in September 2020. A recall petition was eventually signed following her suspension from Parliament over the affair, and after she'd refused to resign upon the request of the then SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon, and again refused to resign when she was asked to by her constituency association, therefore both insulting her own party and her own constituents, you can see the enormous damage she's done to her party's reputation there, in a seat she was holding with a majority of just over 5,000. More nationally, there have been issues with the SNP too, though. Nicola Sturgeon's departure as First Minister and the subsequent ongoing investigation into misappropriation of SNP funds spelled the end of an era for the SNP in a way, and her successor Humza Yousaf has failed to recover the party's reputation thus far, not least of which in Rutherglen and Hamiton West, where their reputation is pretty much as grim as it gets. So the main opposition to a Labour victory was, by and large, when you look at this in that context, removed. And bear in mind, as I said a moment ago, this seat regularly switches hands. Ferrier was first elected in 2015 when Ed Miliband's Labour lost Scotland. But 2 years later, it was one of the seats Jeremy Corbyn won back in 2017, only for it to be lost again thanks to Starmer and the Labour rights sabotage of the general election in 2019, ensuring the Tories won that election. But as long as they got rid of Corbyn, it was worth it, it would seem. But the SNP and its problems aren't the whole story here either. The Tories completely collapsed. Now, given their conference has just ended, typically political parties get a bit of a boost after such events, but Sunak hasn't gained anything at all. If anything, he lost ground afterwards. And in Rutherglen and Hamiton West, the Tories lost so much ground that they lost their deposit with it. You lose your deposit if you get less than 5% of the vote. And the Tories won just 3.9% of the vote. They lost over 11% of their vote share. That's enormous. And if that were extrapolated across the country, well, they'd be reduced to a rump. It's not a seat the Tories have ever won, though, this. They've never got more than 20% of the vote there, and that was when Labour collapsed in 2015, following Ed Miliband sharing a platform with David Cameron to oppose Scottish independence. Some tactical voting, and indeed that also played its part here, handing a bloody nose to the Tories and the SNP, both of whom are reputationally damaged, is something that we can readily say on the back of these results. People may have turned out to vote for Labour as the tactical option perhaps, but turnout itself is a factor here. The turnout was just 37.2%, a little over half of those that turned out for the 2019 general election, for instance. And even by by-election standards, that's rough. To put that in perspective, we recently had 3 other by-elections in one day, didn't we? With the turnout in Uxbridge being 46%, Selby and Ainsty 45%, and Somerton and Frome was 44%. If people were turning out for Labour, enthused by them, and given they increased their vote share by 24% over the 2019 election results, how come the actual number of people who voted for them went down then? 17,845 people voted for Michael Shanks. Labour had more votes here in 2015 when the party lost Scotland than it got last night. So if that's tactically voting for Labour, well, a lot of former Labour voters must have stayed at home then. Same can be said of SNP and Tory voters though. A lot of people from across the political party spectrum, across the board it would appear, chose to stay at home. Of course, the Tories have been suffering in Scotland for more reasons than just Sunak having a rubbish conference, because like the SNP, they are also poorly regarded right now. Partygate did the Tories no favour anywhere, Boris Johnson being caught cheating the COVID rules on an even greater scale than the deposed Margaret Ferrier did. So if the SNP were to suffer because of her, perhaps it's no surprise the Tories did so badly that they lost their deposit. From Labour's perspective, they did, as usual, throw the kitchen sink at this by-election. Not something they could do during a full general election campaign, with shadow ministers door-knocking, pressing the flesh and desperate to do well, but with Starmer once again imposing a candidate of his sort, of his choosing, and nothing quite says vote Labour like a guy who chose to vote for someone else rather than support the party when it was led by Corbyn. He voted elsewhere during the 2019 election, and when it actually stood for some stuff, but he's welcomed back. He became a candidate. Being anti-Corbyn is worthy of promotion these days, apparently. Says a lot for what room and what representation there is for the left under this regime. It's no surprise they may not have turned out to vote for Labour last night. Functionally, though, Labour had nothing to sell but snake oil on the doorstep. You can't vote for policy with Labour because they refuse to have any, and any announcements they do make inevitably get you turned on. It's not a party that you can trust, but that was a moot point yesterday. The SNP deserved a bloody nose, according to Rutherglen and Hamiton West, as did the Tories. Turnout was down, Labour's vote share went up, but number of votes was down. Apathy was the biggest winner on the night, but it's given Labour much to cheer about publicly, though privately, if they're drinking their own Kool-Aid, they should wake up to the fact they won because of other parties being more disliked than they are, not because of anything they actually stand for. What do you reckon, though? Fair analysis or not? Sour grapes interpretation of a rotten lefty, or are the warning signs there for Labour to take note of? Let me know your thoughts on the vid on the by-election. Is there any other factors I haven't thought of that count for something here, do you think? Do let me know in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where one person who is solidly onto the dishonesty and populist weather-vane positioning of Keir Starmer is the SNP's Westminster spokesman, Stephen Flynn. He knows how to dish it out to Starmer as well as the Tories, and I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Keir Starmer, as many of you will know if you watch on a regular basis, is not a guy I think highly of whatsoever. And I pretty much think he's one of the biggest dangers to society going. That's all before he's even got the keys to number 10. Because even before he reaches power, he's showing how dangerously ignorant and stupid he is. And once again, this concerns the issue of Northern Ireland and an Irish reunification referendum. Now, it was only a couple of months ago that I did a video where he implied he might violate the Good Friday Agreement on this issue, but now he's come out and he's basically confirmed it. Well, he needs to read the Good Friday Agreement still, because clearly he hasn't, and he also needs to realise what the optics will be like on the island of Ireland for a London-based Westminster politician arbitrarily imposing diktat on another country, as this can easily be seen to be. What he is doing and saying is illegal, and he's endangering peace in Northern Ireland with his bias, his ignorance and his arrogance. Right, so Keir Starmer's already been running his mouth off and causing consternation ahead of Labour conference even beginning, with regards to Northern Ireland, having managed to make matters even worse after he put his foot in it over the matter back in August, which I have covered previously. Now, without going over everything I spoke about then, the 2021 Northern Irish census for the first time showed a majority Catholic population, and under the terms of the agreement, should a majority of the population of Northern Ireland want one, or the perception of a majority is there by the UK government, a referendum on Irish reunification, the North rejoining the Republic of Ireland potentially, should be held. It's built into the agreement. It is a legal condition of it. Starmer previously hinted that if such a referendum were to be held, he would campaign for Northern Ireland to remain in the Union. And this was bad enough, because actually Westminster has no say in the matter. Absolute zero. And so neither does the arrogant Starmer. The actual line in the agreement that is relevant to this states, "It is for the people of the island of Ireland alone, by agreement between the two parts respectively, and without external impediment, to exercise their right to self-determination." In other words, it is for the people of the island of Ireland to decide this. Nobody else gets a say. That includes you, Keith. Well, it seems he might not be very happy about this prospect. How dare these Irish people think they can freeze me out? Who do they think they are? Do they not know who I am? I'm important. And so he's gone and said now that a referendum on Irish unification would be ruled out by him in power. He told BBC Northern Ireland on the question of a reunification referendum, "I don't think we're anywhere near that kind of question. It's absolutely hypothetical. It's not even on the horizon." Now, it wasn't just me that's called into question Starmer's familiarity with the Good Friday Agreement. Jeremy Corbyn said that perhaps he ought to actually read it before opening his ignorant cakehole back in August. But it seems he still hasn't done so. Effectively, the position he's taking is that even though it might be clear to the UK government that a majority in favour of reunification was there, or the perception of it, he'd ignore that fact. Now, back in August, this position put Starmer somewhat at odds with his then Northern Ireland Secretary Peter Kyle, who said if the conditions for a referendum were met, he would be prepared to call one. However, he's since been shuffled out of that post and replaced with Hillary Bomber Ben. And between him and Starmer, they're more fixated on getting Stormont functioning once more. And a statement like this is only designed to appeal to the right-wingers over there, the Unionists, the DUP. It's the blatant reassurance to them. But this language endangers the decades-long peace the Good Friday Agreement brought in. It breaks faith with the people of Northern Ireland as far as self-determination goes. And it's a dangerous game born out of a sheer ignorance, in my opinion. The Good Friday Agreement took this out of the hands of Westminster on purpose. So it all very much sounds like a ballot needs to be taken in order to prove to Westminster, certainly if it's a Westminster led by Keir Starmer, that the conditions for a referendum, that the majority of the people of Northern Ireland want a referendum on unification. If such a thing were organised, would Starmer butt out of it? It would be illegal for him to interfere, campaign one way or the other, and sign of any sign of anything like that, and the result would be nullified, you would think, surely. Do you honestly believe Starmer would stay out of it? I don't. He's too full of himself. He's too self-important, and I don't think he'd allow a rerun after he interfered. But let's argue he abided by the conditions for a moment, and keeps his nose out of it, though. And a majority do vote in favour of unification. What would he do then? Refuse? Again, he'd be breaking the law. In my view, he'll do what he can to stop a proven majority say that they're in favour of a referendum. To my mind, he'll try and stymie the process instead. He'll interfere to stop it happening. And with Stormont not functioning, it's hard to see actually how any of this could be formally organised to begin with. But that's not to say Starmer doesn't want Stormont up and running. He does, and Ben does. But when he's appealing to the interests of the DUP, whose popularity is waning in favour of the more left-wing Sinn Féin, who are absolutely pro-referendum, it could well be that Sinn Féin holding a majority right now as they currently do, the very reason Stormont is shut after all, because if the DUP aren't in charge, they spit their dummies out, pick their balls up and go home. Even this more subtle level of interference can be interpreted as violating the Good Friday Agreement, though. It's not for someone in London to dictate to the island of Ireland what they can and can't do, to interfere in democratic, legislated process. Yet this is what Starmer is implying he would do by saying, despite the results of that Northern Irish 2021 census, that this is not on the horizon. He can't know that without the question being asked. If you get Stormont up and running again, as much as that is necessary to the efficient running of Northern Ireland, it also allows Sinn Féin to organise proof that a majority of Northern Irish people want that reunification. The DUP keep on playing into their hands by causing the place to be shut down every time they don't get their own way, after all. I can't imagine how fed up a lot of people over there must be to never having a functioning government, and the DUP are absolutely resolute in keeping things that way until Sunak's Windsor framework is binned, despite that being genuinely beneficial to Northern Ireland. Their ideological insanity literally harming the lives of everyone who lives in Northern Ireland right now. Reunification would end that, you would imagine, and these self-serving batshit unionists would be completely neutered and cease to have a reason for being, hence why they're opposed to it. The fact is, the people of Ireland have a right to decide this, though. It's not a case of it not being on the horizon. They're closer to it now than at any other point in the 100-plus year history of Northern Ireland's existence. And it isn't just about unity or power or Keir Starmer trying to show himself to be tough as opposed to a complete dumbass. The Good Friday Agreement brought the end of the Troubles, the end of the killing, and rhetoric like his risks it beginning again if a Westminster government cannot be trusted to act in good faith. It's for the people of Ireland to decide their future. It's not for any British Prime Minister, whoever they be, however big-headed they are, to say no to. Starmer would do well to sit down and actually, for heaven's sake, read the Good Friday Agreement and understand it before mouthing off about things he's completely ignorant of. And he'd also do worse than to read some James Connolly too, despite his allergy to socialism, because Connolly said, "The British government has no right in Ireland, never had any right in Ireland, and never can have any right in Ireland." And that's as true today as it was more than 100 years ago when he said it. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily, and do leave a comment below as well. Have your say on this story. Be part of the conversation too. What do you make of Starmer's stance? Can you see him causing a crisis with his ignorance and arrogance in Northern Ireland? Do let me know your thoughts. I do love to read them. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation, more on the problems Starmer caused with his previous comments back in August, more of the ramifications of his actions that I didn't go over again here, and I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so a Green Party conference opened up, rather unfortunately, as the results for the Rutherglen and Hamiton West by-election came out. So whilst the media fixated on that, they had ample excuse to ignore the Green Party as per usual. But the conference has opened up with a bang, not waiting for the party leader's speech until the end of the conference like the Tories did, but starting with it as co-leaders Carla Denyer and Adrian Ramsay had a few home truths to tell to the main parties that ought to have them sitting up and taking notice. But of course, when what they are saying goes woefully underreported, then what pressure are they under? It'd be a shame if people shared content to do something about that, wouldn't it? Right, so Green Party conference has kicked off in Brighton. I'd love to be there. My circumstances as a carer, as many of you are familiar with, somewhat present that from happening. However, that's not to say feedback and announcements and speech content hasn't come out. You just have to find it for people, buried as it tends to be. We can't have people listening to the Green Party after all. They are the anti-establishment opposition now. People might get ideas about things being run differently, ideas about their station. They need to know their place, and nothing quite conveys that like two main parties being led by knights of the realm and the other one led by one of the richest men in the country, does it? Well, the Green Party co-leaders do not fit into that box. Carla Denyer's background is in mechanical engineering, working in the wind energy sector, so her commitment to divestment from fossil fuels is nailed on. And Adrian Ramsay entered local politics at the age of 21, becoming one of the organisers of Caroline Lucas's 2010 election campaign, which saw her elected as the first ever Green Party MP. So between the two of them, they got a top election strategist and a switched-on practical environmentalist running the show. So no wonder they aspire to increase the number of Green MPs represented in Parliament and build on that. More on that in a moment, though. In all likelihood, this is the last Green Party conference before we have that general election, though, and the Greens need to stand out, need to show they are the real opposition now, as all other parties fight to be as similar as possible to each other, whilst trying to imply they be the best ones at doing exactly the same failed politics that have left the country where it is after 13 years of Tory misrule. Adrian Ramsay, in fact, started his part of the leader's speech by saying much the same thing regarding the Tories, how they keep finding new ways to break Britain, and that actually after 13 years in power, that's quite a feat. It certainly isn't one to cheer, though, although what appears to be impending collapse really ought to be. He didn't let the likely next party in power off the hook either, though. He continued, "But no matter what new climate crimes or damaging policy the government comes up with, Labour somehow manages to disappoint us just as much. Time after time they come out swinging at the Conservatives, and then when asked, does this mean you will reverse these decisions if you get into government? Radio silence. They are bystanders to the Conservative chaos, caring more about doing politics than about what's right." It is of course true. The two-child benefit cap Labour will not reverse. Gas and oil licences the Tories are signing off that Labour will not reverse. Starmer once stood for a second referendum and Remain being put on the ballot with regard to the EU. He now wants to make the Tories' Brexit work instead. He once stood for renationalisation. He now stands for keeping privatisation. Not even reversing it in our NHS. Privatisation that has happened because of this Tory government, the Starmer won't reverse either. Opposition in name only. So what is the point of an opposition that doesn't oppose? When they are all pro-establishment, pro-keeping things as they are, pro-maintaining the status quo. They're not an opposition then, because to be an opposition you have to be opposing establishment interests. And that is where the Green Party are, and the Green Party alone seem to be. Carla Denyer picked up on the Tories' record on the climate when she came to speak. She said, "The Tories have been a disaster for the climate, playing cynical political games with the biggest issue of our time. First they cut to the green crap, a decision that is still costing us dearly today. Quite literally, dearly. Energy bills in the UK are nearly £2.5 billion higher than it would have been if the government hadn't dismissed climate policy over the last decade. Not content with that, they're now doubling down on their climate vandalism, granting permission for a huge coal mine, failing to get a single bid for vital offshore wind projects, weakening our net zero commitments by opening up the enormous Rosebank oil field. We know Sunak has no interest in the environment. He literally lost a minister over that fact. His interests in opening up that enormous oil field are as much to him about personal gain, given his sponsors, Infosys, his wife's family firm, have financial interest with BP and Shell, who will obviously be bidding for drilling licences at Rosebank." Denyer didn't let Starmer's bunch off either, though, as she continued. And Labour? They're following them every step of the way, willing onlookers to the Conservatives' climate crimes. Rosebank? The right decision, says Gordon Brown. Their reasoning? Investor certainty. Sounds good, right? But let us translate. Labour is more interested in fossil fuel investors getting their dirty profits than in taking meaningful climate action. Well, of course they are. Donors in the making, aren't they? And Starmer himself is no more interested in climate change than Sunak is. His gaffe during a clean energy presentation by Ed Miliband, which was referred to as well in this speech, reportedly having him saying, "I'm not interested in offering hope and change. I'm not interested in tree huggers. In fact, I hate them." There is only one planet for us all to live on, and we're offered the choice of two main parties under first past the post, neither of whom give a shit about it because they're rich, they're for the rich, and not for us or the planet. Small-minded, short-term thinking little men beholden to people just like them and people they'd like to be like, and not like us. We cannot keep giving these people, these parties, a second thought when it comes to who we vote for if we want to effect change. Some of you watching this might be thinking it is easier to get Starmer to change than Sunak, so let's just get the Tories out first and then deal with him and Labour after. But we played that game for decades to no avail. Tactical voting is senseless. It can only make sense when opposition parties are all broadly aligned in real, meaningful opposition to what the governing party is doing. But they're not. They're aping them. They're copying them. Labour criticised the Tories, but when asked what they do differently, they go silent. The Lib Dems would just happily make up the numbers for whoever they see fit to. But they proved they couldn't challenge the Tories in power when in coalition with them, and they'd be no different now, led as they still are, by a former coalition minister. If we want to change, we have to snap out of that mindset and vote for change, vote for real, meaningful policies. So what did Denyer and Ramsay put on offer in their keynote speech on that score then? The ethos is very simple. While the Tories pretend we can't afford to go net zero because of the cost of living crisis, the Greens are saying both go hand in hand, and efforts to fix one will help to fix the other. A nationwide home insulation scheme to insulate homes better and get energy bills down would also lower emissions. More investment in renewable energy, 11 times cheaper to produce than fossil fuels are to source, will help the climate whilst also lowering household bills and create jobs too, boosting the economy. This obviously leads to the obvious scientific solution that Starmer won't commit to, and that is that no new oil and gas means no new oil and gas. Improve agricultural practices so they are less damaging, and put the funding in to allow farmers to do that. As one of the most nature-depleted countries in Europe, we need more tree huggers in Parliament and fewer Keir Starmers. Renationalisation of water, taking it out of the hands of the failing water companies who have been filling it with horribleness and back under public control again, taking back what was stolen from us to begin with. Let's do that. Greens are saying, yeah, we'll do it. The NHS has been brought to breaking point. Dentists are impossible to find. Waiting lists are growing. The staff all get blamed, and all that gets promised is more reform, which is just means private and more privatisation, doesn't it? It's just another name for that. It's just a cover for it, whether it be the Tories or Labour saying it. The Greens will return the NHS fully into public ownership, including dentistry, and reverse the outsourcing and creeping privatisation other NHS reforms have brought in. Decent pay for public sector workers is what they deserve, and they would get it. The cost of living crisis is pushing people into poverty, and Labour are axing every policy they had to address that in their pursuit of just being slightly less awful than the Tories themselves. The Greens would lift the two-child benefit cap. It would only cost £1.5 billion to do, and do it with a super tax on the very rich, which would raise a lot of money, and so that particular policy would be very easily covered, and then some. There will be a lot more to come, and the overarching emphasis is how much louder they can get these policy positions spoken about with greater representation, with more of them in Parliament. However, the Greens are coming in for more sneering when their announced target for MPs in this Parliament is to increase their number from 1 MP to 4. 4 MPs? Big deal, you might think. What can just 4 Green MPs do? Well, you've all heard of Caroline Lucas, haven't you? One of the best known MPs going. That's what one Green MP can do. Draw attention to themselves to raise awareness of the issues they stand for. Put pressure on larger parties. 4 of them? Well, they can do that even more. It's the nature of the electoral system. It's first past the post that keeps wrong-uns in power, that the Greens, like any other small party, struggle to gain traction. That they can win as many votes as you like, but ultimately they can never win enough of them in the right places in order to win seats. And that's just preposterous. You've likely heard of Green Party peer Jenny Jones in the House of Lords, who attempted a fatal motion to stop Suella Braverman bringing in police powers the Lords had already vetoed by abusing statutory instruments, which failed thanks to Labour peers sitting on their hands over it. But equally, she succeeded in leading a revolt against the Tories allowing developers to dump in rivers, and that got binned off, and I've covered both of those stories in other videos. Sunak's bunch are now planning on bringing back developer dumping as a separate bill, incidentally, determined as they are to make the condition of our rivers even worse. But this is what a single Green in the Lords could do. They may be few in number, but they do big things. They bring about change. They get themselves heard. They punch above their weight. And they stop the criminal activity, as it should be called, frankly, of bigger parties. They will push for stops on shareholder payouts until the rivers and seas are clean and safe to bathe in again, as another for instance. The 4 target seats are of course holding on to Brighton Pavilion, where Lucas is stepping down and former Green Party leader Sian Berry is standing. Carla Denyer herself is taking on the Labour seat of Thangham, Debonair and Bristol Central. Adrian Ramsey is thus far the only candidate announced for the new seat of Waveney Valley on the Norfolk-Suffolk border, and they are also targeting the Tory seat of North Herefordshire to be challenged for by former Green MP Ellie Chowns. I reckon Joe Bird in Birkenhead has a solid shot too, but that's my opinion. Any increase in Green Party representation will have a meaningful impact, even if the numbers imply otherwise. Why else would establishment media choose to ignore them rather than risk platforming them? We need more Green MPs. After the incredible success of local election wins for the party, it is true to say that they are attracting people from across the board. There is no reason for that to not progress to parliamentary level, and it needs to if we're to ever have any hope of change. Thanks for watching. I hope you found that video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do give me your thoughts on this in the comments below. And are the Greens getting your vote? Do you like what you've heard thus far, or do you still have questions about that? Conference will go on for a few days more yet. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Green Party peer Jenny Jones did indeed hand the Tories a defeat in the Lords, just to re-emphasise what a single Green can do. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Keir Starmer's unavowed allegiance to the apartheid state of Israel has sunk to new lows, as the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, who have a fringe event and stall at Labour conference beginning tomorrow, have already been censored, preventing them having any mention of Israeli apartheid present because, according to Team Keith, this would be detrimental to the Labour Party. In what way? Will Luke Akehurst turn puce and throw up in a bin somewhere? Will the Board of Deputies say something mean to you? Are you that scared of the Israel lobby you fear ramifications from them if you don't acquiesce to your Zionist paymasters, Keith? By censoring Palestine solidarity, you're picking a side, and you're picking the side of the oppressor against the oppressed. So even before Labour's miserable conference even kicks off in Liverpool, people are sickened by it. Right, so the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, the PSC, have for years hosted a fringe event with stall and literature at Labour Party conference standing up for the Palestinian cause. But in an arrogant display of showing the Tories just how to screw up a conference even before theirs has even started, Keir Starmer, that Zionist without qualification, has provoked outrage that will no doubt cheer his Israel lobby backers by censoring the event. A press release issued by Labour regarding the PSC event states that Labour have taken the decision not to allow PSC to use the word apartheid to describe their annual conference stall or fringe meeting in Labour printed or online brochures. When asked for a justification of its decision, the leader, Keir Starmer's office, said Labour would not publish content that we believe to be detrimental to the party. Detrimental how, though? How is standing up for an oppressed minority going to be detrimental to your party? Unless your concerns relate more to how the state of Israel views you and how criticism of that might affect your own party interests. It's also quite telling that by saying it is detrimental to party interests, they can put up no reasoning to refute the allegation that Israel is an apartheid state, just that they simply don't want to acknowledge that fact. It's certainly not going to affect ordinary members up and down the country if Israel is seen to be an apartheid state and is accused as such, is shown with evidence to be such, but it will definitely piss a lot of them off to ignore the issue when plenty are, at the very least, cursorily aware of the issues going on. Starmer has just this morning put out a tweet causing a lot of offence and disgust, saying, I utterly condemn the ongoing attacks on Israel and her citizens. There is no justification for this act of terror which is being perpetrated by those who seek to undermine any chance for future peace in the region. Israel has a right to defend herself. So does Palestine. But where's your tweet about that? You never say likewise about Palestine, do you? Ever. And now he wants to clamp down on others being able to say anything as well, picking his side again. On top of that, amongst the litany of policy positions he has watered down or binned, amongst those weakened has been the commitment to recognise a Palestinian state if elected. Now it's just an aspiration to achieve that alongside other international partners, so basically binned. Siding with the oppressor against the oppressed, though of course he can say he stands with Ukraine against Russia without any hint of shame at the blatant hypocrisy that shows. The PSC event this year is called Justice for Palestine, End Apartheid, but Labour are not happy about Israel being referred to as an apartheid state, even though that is exactly what it is. They have challenged the decision and got absolutely nowhere. The PSC are hardly the only organisation calling Israel an apartheid state, though. B'Tselem have said it, Amnesty International, replete with its lawyers and forensic analysis of the situation, have said it, and Starmer, as a former human rights lawyer who will have worked with human rights advocates such as these, knows this. How can he not know it? But instead of facing that reality and challenging it as a credible leader should, he chooses what benefits himself instead. Those Israel lobbyists, those Trevor Chin Jewish Leadership Council-style donors, and simply says he doesn't accept the facts when presented to him, doesn't agree with them, ignores evidence in favour of his own arrogant opinion, and that's not someone you want in power. The keynote speaker at the PSC event is a chap called Saleh Hijazi, who is the apartheid-free policy coordinator for the BDS National Committee, Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions. Will Starmer's Labour even permit him to be introduced as that with their diktat upon the event? Remains to be seen. Hijazi was also, however, one of the co-authors of what is widely regarded as the seminal report amongst human rights agencies on Israeli apartheid, namely that produced by Amnesty International, stating with evidence that Israel is practicing apartheid as defined by the Rome Statute of 1998, which states that apartheid is an institutionalized regime of systematic oppression and domination by one racial group over any other racial group or groups, and committed with the intention of maintaining that regime. It is a crime against humanity. It isn't like the issue isn't being adequately recognised by various other bodies that Labour can ignore either. For one, its own trade union backers, for example, with the recent TUC conference passing motions of solidarity once again with Palestine, with various unions having done so in their own rights. A prime example is the ASLEF rail union boss Mick Whelan, who is on the Labour Party National Executive Committee, the NEC, and who is also going to be speaking at the PSC Fringe event, has said, "You cannot tackle an injustice unless you are prepared to name it. Solidarity with Palestinians means addressing the reality of the system of apartheid under which they are forced to live." Of course, there are others on the NEC, though, for whom promoting the position Starmer has taken is much more important, and whose position on the NEC has many people wondering just how much control the Israel lobby really does have on the Labour Party now. And I am, of course, referring to the aforementioned Luke Akehurst here, who is literally director of an Israel lobbyist firm, We Believe in Israel. He's just been caught on film talking about how delegates at conference have been managed to prevent them from voting for a boycott on Israel, how motions of that nature have been blocked, because if the leadership allowed them to happen, they, the party, the Israel-supporting Labour Party, would have lost it. God forbid people exercise their opinion in a supposedly democratic party in a democratic way, though, eh? The best statement to sum all of this up that I've seen, though, comes from Saleh Hijazi himself, who has said, "The Labour Party under Keir Starmer's leadership has moved from turning a blind eye to Israel's regime of settler colonialism and apartheid against the Palestinian people, which owes a lot to a century of British complicity, to silencing those who advocate for Palestinian rights. By attempting to censor the term apartheid in relation to Israel, Labour's leadership is ironically recalling the darkest era of Thatcher's support for South African apartheid. It's a stance against the growing international human rights consensus about Israel's regime of oppression, against Palestinian freedom, justice and equality, and against the expressed position of an overwhelming majority of Labour's membership. It's a stance for ongoing and shameful complicity with Israeli apartheid." Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on the comments below on this. Be part of the conversation. Are you as disgusted as I am over this, as other pro-Palestine voices are? Do let me know. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Luke Akehurst's staunch, undying defence of Israel and conflating criticism of that with anti-Semitism, the Zionist way, got exposed and then some when he took on Jewish human rights activist Jackie Walker and came up well short. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.